It is freezing. Well, y'all are having a good night. Oh my goodness, it is so cold. Brr. I don't know what I did with my headset now. I took down my microphone because evidently my laptop's like not accepting it that well anymore. The temperature like really dropped here. It's supposed to get like down to 20s this week. It's 53 right now. Which that's like nothing to most places, but for me, I don't like the cold. So let's see. I keep getting these posts that go against community standards that I'm not posting. So I ended up having to like reaffirm my account earlier, which was weird. After I went live earlier, I fell asleep. And I didn't put an alarm on, and I'm glad I woke up. I'm sorry I'm late, but hey, Nikki. How are you? Hope y'all are having a good night. I'm trying to get this. Where's it at? I'm on chapter 22. We are so close to the end of this. I got these splash waters. It's pineapple mango. Usually oh my gosh. Ow. Usually, like, I get these, make like cocoa or something. I literally just woke up. I had a little nap. Hydrate. Brr. I am freezing. For real. That temperature dropped quick. All right. Trying to see if anybody else can join us. Hey, Daniel. It's on its way. There's a cold front. And it's like dropping the temperature like so much. It is so cold here right now. It doesn't feel like 50 something. It feels like 20 something. And plus, I'm in a camper, so. Yeah. I got this heater direct on me. I got a blanket over me. I got my shawl on. I'm trying my best to stay warm. I went ahead and turned my blanket on too, and I'm trying to make sure it's going to stay on tonight. Get a nice heat lamp to shine down on you. See, this camper is being electrified by a drop cord. Very not safe, but it's all we've got right now. So, anyways, chapter 22 of Kiss of the Highlander. Hopefully I can get this done tonight. That would be really nice, right? Besetta Alexander sat motionless, one hand clenching her yew sticks, the other on her Bible. She maced at her own foolishness. She knew which one was more useful, and it wasn't the fat tomb. She'd had her vision again. Nevin, blood dripping from his lips, the woman weeping, Tristan McKelter scowling, and the fourth nameless person's presence, who seemed also to be so troubled by her son's death. What could one old woman do to defy fate? How could she, with too many years on her bones and too little vigor in her veins, avert the impending tragedy? Nevin wouldn't heed her pleas. She begged him to give up his post and return to Edinburgh, but he'd refused. She pretended to be grievously ill, but he'd seen through her ploys. Sometimes she wondered that the lad had sprung from her loins so implacably that his faith in God so resisted her to her sight. He forced a promise from her that she would not harm Tristan McKelter. In truth, she didn't wish to harm anyone. She only wanted her son alive. But she'd begun to realize that she was going to have to harm someone or lose Nevin. She sat rocking for a time uncounted as morning slipped away into afternoon and blended with gloaming, fighting the yawning darkness in her mind. It was full twilight, the highlands alive with the hum of frogs and soft hooting of owls, when she heard bells jingling, voices shouting, and the thunder of horses approaching the cottage. Besetta pushed herself from her chair, scurried to the door, and opened it a crack. When she saw the gypsy caravan, she closed it to a hairbreadth, for the wild gypsies frightened her. She counted 10 and 7 wagons in the caravan, gaily decorated and pulled by prancing horses draped in silks. They thundered past towards Ballinnock. Nevin had told her some time ago that the gypsies camped each summer near the McKelter estate, where they hosted a trade fair in Ballinnock, told fortunes, and mingled with the village folk. There would be a wild dancing and bonfires, and next year, babes with dark eyes and skin. Besetta shuddered, closed the door, and leaned against it. Y'all better not be outside as cold as it is. Gotta get onto them, you know? Basetta shuddered, closed the door, and leaned against it. But as a possibility slowly took shape in her mind, she struggled to rise above her fears. With the gypsy's dark arts, she could remove the threat without harming anyone. Well, not really harming anyone. The Rom sold powerful spells and enchantments, cheek by jowl, with their more ordinary wares. They cost dearly, but she knew where to find an illuminated gold leaf tomb that would more than cover the price for anything she sought. The longer she considered it, the more appealing the solution seemed. If she paid the gypsies to enchant the Lord, she wouldn't really be harming him. She would just be suspending him indefinitely, so that Nevin might live out his life in safety and peace. It would mean she would have to seek those wild creatures out, brave their bawdy, sinful camp, and for her beloved Nevin, she would brave anything. Sylvan and Nell had fled their perch the moment Gwen released Justin from the garderobe. Nell hadn't needed to wait around to see what was going to happen next. During Justin and Gwen's intimate talk, she had been surprised the door itself hadn't gone up in flames. She had followed Sylvan in a blind dash to his tower, where they'd collapsed on his bed, huffing and sorely out of breath from their mad race up 100 stairs. Then, when her heart finally stopped pounding, she realized, with much consternation, where she was perched. On the Lord's bed, next to him. She sensed to move away. The strong hands on her waist, he caught her before she could flee, and turned her face toward his with a firm hand beneath her chin. His eyes were brimming with emotion as he searched her gaze. Deep in their brown depths, tiny golden flecks glittered. She couldn't look away for anything. She gazed at him mutely. "Hey, Paul." Then slowly, so slowly, that he gave her 1,000 lifetimes to turn away, he lowered his lips towards hers. Nell's breath hitched in her throat. It had been 12 years since she'd kissed a man. Did she even recall how? "It's been a long time since I last kissed a lass, Nellie," he said huskily, as if sensing her fears. "I beg you be patient. You might need to remind me of the finer nuances." Her breath came out in a sudden rush, ending in a small moan. His admission dashed her fears. In all her years at Castle Kelter, she had not once seen Selvin woo a woman. She'd thought he was simply discreet about his manly needs. Mayhap went to the village to satisfy his urges. But was it possible he'd been as alone as she had? She wanted to ask how long, but couldn't bring herself to voice the question. No matter, for he read it in her eyes. Yeah, it's my kids. They're outside. They're being asses. No matter, for he read it in her eyes. "Since my wife died, Nellie." She gasped. "Would you kiss me, such an untried man?" he asked softly. Not trusting herself to speak, she nodded. His first brush was soft and tentative, much how she felt, and he hadn't tried to plunge right in. Nay, Sylvan kissed her as if she were made of fine china, kissed her lips, brushing back and forth, kissing her nose, her chin, and then her lips again, kissed the corners of her mouth, then pulled away and regarded her soberly. She tried a tentative smile. His second kiss was warm and encouraging. By the third touch of his lips to hers, a part of her she thought was dead was dancing a Scottish reel, and remembering how to kiss as if she'd never stopped. He certainly hadn't forgotten. Hey, Monster Jam! I fell asleep, bro, for real. I literally fell asleep right here. As soon as that last stream was over, I fell asleep. His fifth was deep and hungry with passion. When he finally broke that kiss she couldn't have for anything, he drew back and said softly, "Oh, Nellie, there is a question I've been wishing to ask of you. And if I'm prying, well, then prying I'll be. 'Tis long past time we spoke freely with each other. Would you tell me, sweet lass, what on earth happened to you the night that I found you?" When tears misted her eyes, he wrapped his arms around her and held her tightly. "There, lass," he whispered. "I've been a damn fool for far too long, and so many things I could have said, should have said, but I was afraid." "Afraid?" Nell whispered incredulously. "What might Sylvan McKelter fear?" "Oh, the possibilities were endless. The fears a myriad. That I couldn't make all your hurt go away. That I might make a fankle of things with you, and that you'd leave. And my lads loved you so. That I might think me strange." "Ye are strange, Sylvan," Nell said seriously. He sighed. "That you wouldn't love me, Nellie." Words she couldn't bring herself to say trembled on her lips. Words that frightened her. Words that would make her heart vulnerable again. So she offered those words to him silently by pressing her lips to his, hoping they might roll off in the kiss and find their way to his heart. Dozens of candles shimmered in the large bedchamber. Justin had made love to her yet another time, so many times that she'd lost count. Gwen's body felt deliciously swollen by kisses and thorough loving from head to toe. In the candlelight, his dark skin shimmered goldenly. His silky black hair gleamed. She gazed at him marvelingly. She had her Justin back. She still couldn't believe it. "Boy, American, Gwen. It is killing me watching you walk around the castle. I was obsessed with you. So much that you spied on me. I watched you. And had you stopped, I like as not would have begun stalking you instead." "A shame I didn't stop then. I was rather sick of humiliating myself." He winced and stretched himself atop her, propping his weight on his elbows. Smoothing a wisp of hair behind her ear, he whispered, "Oh, lass, forgive me." "For what? Being a stubborn medieval man and refusing to believe me right away?" she teased. "Aye, for that, and many other things," he said sadly. "For not preparing you better. For being afraid to trust you fully." I understand why you didn't, she cut him off gently. Nell told me about your three... Oh, Nell told me about your three betrothed. She said that they were frightened of you, and I realized the reason you didn't confide in me was because you thought that I'd leave you. I should have believed better of you. For heaven's sakes, you just woken up to find yourself 5 centuries into the future. Besides, she admitted, it wasn't as if I trusted you either. I tend to hide my intelligence. If I'd been more honest, you might have been too. Never hide it from me, he said softly. 'Tis one of the many things I adore about you. But Gwen, there's more for which I must seek your forgiveness. Marrying me without telling me? This is random, but what do you think would happen if you shot something sharp at a hot air balloon? It might get bigger. It depends. I would assume that it would pop the side of the material. But what do I know? Marrying me without telling me, she said lightly. Have you any idea how flattered I am? We're really married, she pressed. Could we get married in a church, too? Formally, with a long dress and everything? Oh, we're more married than the church could do, but aye, lass, I should like a church wedding. You wear a gown fit for a queen, and I'll wear full Celtic regalia. We'll feast for days, invite the whole village. 'Twill be a celebration of the century. He paused, with silvery eyes flickering with shadows. But there's still something more for which I seek your forgiveness. There's a small matter of me abducting you and trapping you in my century. She trailed her fingers lovingly. Hey, Robert! Down his chiseled jaw, then slipped her hands into his silky hair, grazing his scalp with her nails. They were nearly touching nose to nose, but his hair fell about her face, framing it. She tipped her head back for a quick kiss, then 2, and then 3. Do you know, she murmured a few minutes later, when you performed your ritual in the stones, I thought that you had gone back to your century and left me behind in mine. I was furious. I was so hurt that you had left me. I thought that you had begun to care for me. I did, he explained. I do. My point is that you told me everything that night in the stones, and then asked me to come back to had asked me to come back to the 16th century. I would have. I wanted to be with you wherever and whenever that had to be. You did not hate me for not being able to return you. He paused for emphasis. Ever, Gwen. I can't return you, ever. I don't want to go back. We belong together. I felt it the moment that I met you, and it terrified me. I kept trying to find excuses to leave you, but I couldn't make myself go. I felt as if fate had brought us together because we were supposed to be together. His smile flashed white on his dark face. I felt the same way. I began falling in love with you the moment I saw you, and the more I learned about you, the more intense my feelings grew. That night in the stones, when you gifted me your maidenhood, when I gave you the druid's vow, I realized I would rather have a single night with you, even if it meant I was doomed to be bound to you, aching for you forever. That I know not that than not know such love. I swore that I would be given the chance to have a life with you. I would treat you as befits a queen. That I would devote my life to making it up to you that I'd taken from you. And I meant it. When? Anything that you want, anything at all. You just, you have but just to say. Love me, Tristan. Just love me, and I'll not want for anything. Later she said, why can't you go through the stones? You said they could never be used for personal reasons. Why do what do you use them for? He told her, withholding nothing. The entire history back to his ancestors, the druids who had served the Tuatha De Danann, and about the war, and how the Kelter were chosen to atone and protect on behalf of all of the druids who scarred Gia. The, la- the last time the stones were used, we sent 2 fleets of temple knights carrying a holy grail 20 years into the future so they might hide it away again. Did you say the holy grail? Gwen squeaked. Aye, we protect. It would have been a war to end all wars if the King of France, Philip the Fair, got in his hands on it. Oh, God, Gwen breathed. The stones may only be used for greater good of the world, never for one man's purpose. I understand, she paused a moment, then forced herself to go on. I had to face a similar kind of situation once. He kissed the tip of her nose. Tell me. I want to know everything about you. She rolled onto her side and she stretched out on his, facing her. Their foreheads touched on the downy pillow, golden hair tangled with black silk. He laced their hands together, palm to palm. She told him all of it, which she had never told another living soul. She confessed to her great fit of rebellion. There had been a time when, like her parents, she adored doing research. The pressure of their expectations had not seemed such a burden to her then. From time From the time she'd been able to walk, they'd made it clear that they expected her to be their greatest achievement, with a genius that would surpass theirs and enhance their reputation. Aww. And until she was 23, she'd towed the line and they'd clearly defined. Her love of learning, of stretching her imagination to the furthest possible limits, had seemed adequate compensation for a strange childhood. She thrived on the rush of excitement whenever she discovered an alternative way of looking at things. And for a glorious time in her adolescence, she basked in her parents' approval and committed to joining them at Los Alamos and working by their side one day. But as she'd grown older and learned more, she realized the danger of certain knowledge. And one night, as she'd work in the lab, she had a terrible realization. For years, she'd been playing around with a set of theories, working toward a hypothesis that, if it held water, would change the way the world viewed everything. Her parents had been delighted with her progress, demanding constant updates, pushing her harder and harder. So engrossed that Gwen had been improving her hypothesis for sheer joy of proving it, that she hadn't given it thought at all the possible ramifications until it had been nearly too late. In a moment of blinding clarity, she suddenly glimpsed all the potentials should she complete her work. The fundamentals of it would make possible weapons to exceed all weapons. Infinite possibilities, not just to destroy the Earth, but to alter the very fabric of the universe. Too much power for man to own. Late that very night, the lab at Triton Court caught fire. Everything was destroyed. The fire chief and arson investigators spent weeks picking through the rubble before writing it up as an accident. Despite the unfathomable heat that had caused the foundation to explode. Hey, Anthony. There had been too many chemicals stored on site to prove anything, and the burn patterns had been oddly random. A veritable study of randomness. Her father had observed coldly when she'd informed him that all of her research had gone up in flames, and she'd failed to keep a backup zip disk in the safety box at the bank as he taught her. 5 days later, Gwen quit school and moved out into her own barren little apartment. Her father had refused to let her take so much as one piece of furniture. She'd never looked back. I set fire to the lab and I'd been working in and burned everything. I dropped out of my parents' world and took a job settling disputes. His eyes were glittering when he finished. He was stunned by what she had just confided. Doubly stunned that fate had brought him such a woman who was his match in every way. Intelligent, passionate, honorable, courageous to defy and to do what she knew was right. What children they would have. What a life they would have. I'm proud of you, Gwen, he said quietly. She smiled radiantly. Thank you. I knew you'd understand. And that's why I understand about the stones. They kissed slowly and passionately. Oops. Oh, I done leaned on my phone and it's got this stupid thing going again. Hold on. There we go. Where was I? All right. They kissed slowly and passionately, as if they had all the time in the world. Then Justin said softly, "'Tis said if the ametuer should use the stones for his own selfish reason, the souls of the lost druids, the evil ones who died in the battle, wait to take possession of such a fool. That they are trapped in a kind of in-between place, neither dead nor living. I know not if it's true, nor dare to chance it, to reawaken such violence, such madness and rage." He broke off. "There is much about druidry that we do not understand. We do not tamper with the unknown. When Diagus died in the other reality, I could not break my oaths." He blanked and looked startlingly. "Diagus," he muttered, pushing himself up. Gwen sat him up with him. "He's alive, remember? You sent 200 guards with him." He rubbed his forehead. "Ugh, 'tis damn odd having two realities in here. I can see why the mind instinctively resists it. I hold all the grief of him dying, yet the awareness that he hasn't." He blew out a breath, frowning. "Yet." Gwen searched his eyes. "You're worried about him." "Nay," he said swiftly. I have my beloved wife. You're worried about him, she said dryly. He raked his hand through his hair. Has the battle happened yet? You never told me what date he died. 2 days hence, the 2nd day of August. Can you get there by then? He nodded, clearly torn, but only if I ride without pause. Then go. Bring him safely home, Tristan, she said softly. I'll be fine here. I can't bear to think that he might die if you're not there. Go. You dismissed me from your bed so soon, he growled, teasingly. But she glimpsed a brush of vulnerability in his eyes. She marveled that such an intelligent, attractive, passionate, sexy man could suffer insecurity. No, if it were up to me, I'd never let you go. But I know that if Diagus doesn't come home safely, I'll hate myself. We have time. We have the rest of our lives, she said, smiling. Oi, that we do. He stretched himself over her again, suspending his weight on his palms, and kissed her with only their lips touching. Long and slow and delicious. The hot silk of his tongue swirled languidly against hers. When he sat back, he was grinning. What? Anaya, I can both secure my brother's safety and tidy up that bit of business. No lass of 5 and 10 will tolerate magic well. I will induce her to break the betrothal, bring my brother home, and toop you till you can't move. For a sennight, nay, a fortnight. You will come back, love me, then we'll get down to figuring out who plans to abduct you, because we still have a big problem, you know. Oh, dang it. Oh my goodness. Why does it do this? No. Alright. Gwen corrected him as a chill of concern marred her dreamy contentment. She was so elated to have her Tristan back, had been so lost in their lovemaking that the danger he was in had completely slipped her mind. She pulled the coverlet about her waist and sat cross-legged facing him. Who abducted you, Tristan? Do you remember anything at all? His silvery eyes darkened. I told you all I could recall about the abduction in your century. I never glimpsed any of my abductors. By the time I neared the clearing, whatever the drug they'd given me had rendered me nearly unconscious. I couldn't even open my eyes. I heard voices, but I couldn't identify them. Then, the first order on the agenda is that I will personally prepare all your food and drink for the next month. He arched a brow. I do not think I care to let you out of my bed that long. There's no way you're drinking or eating a thing that hasn't either been prepared by me or sampled by someone first. Hey! How are you doing, Lee? I'm reading a book. There's an idea, he mused. After all, 'twas only a drug, not a poison. Our guards have been known to serve such a function in times of danger. I asked Sylvan who might wish to harm you. He said, you have no enemies. Can you think of anyone? Justin pondered her question. Nay, the only possibility I can think of is if someone thought to steal our lore. But that doesn't explain why someone would enchant me. Why wouldn't they have killed me? Why make me slumber? He shook his head. I thought that once I got back here, I would see some hint of a threat, but still, I can't imagine who it might be. Well, then the message comes. When the message comes, you won't go. We can send the guards to the clearing. What day were you abducted? The 17th day of August, a fortnight after Dagus was. He trailed off, his concern etched on his face. Go now, she urged. He looked so worried. We can talk about it more when you return. Go bring your brother home. Sylvan and I will put our heads together and list some possible suspects while you're gone. Then, when you and Diagus return, we'll figure it out. I do not wish to leave you. Gwen sighed. She didn't want him to leave her either. She was just only gotten him back again. But she knew that if she had a brother, and if her brother had died in some other reality, she'd need to be there to make certain he didn't die this time. She couldn't bear it if anything went wrong. Driston needed to be there, and he needed her to encourage him to go. You must, she insisted. I can't ride well enough yet, and I'd slow you down. You might not make it in time if you take me. Raking a hand through his hair, he slipped from the bed, looking impossibly torn. His gaze swept over her skin flushed from lovemaking, lips swollen from the kisses. She sat cross-legged amid the violet velvet coverlets, a creamy goddess rising from a purple sea. A lovelier vision I ne'er seen, he said huskily. Gwen beamed at her magnificent Highlander. I'll be back, lass. I bid you do not move a muscle so I could find you looking just the same. But I fear it'll be 4 or 5 days before I return. It might take me 4 or 5 days to start walking right again. He flashed her a grin of pure male satisfaction, dressed swiftly, kissed her a dozen times, and then slipped from the chamber. Then poked his head back in. I love you, Gwen. Gwen fell back on the bed, sighing dreamily. Love. Gwen Cassidy had a heart, and it was loved. Say it, he said anxiously. She laughed delightedly. I love you too, Tristan. His neediness about hearing the words was adorable. Her Highlander hunk had such a charming vulnerability. He smiled brilliantly and was gone. Hey, Quentin. In Tristan's absence, Gwen, Sylvan, and Nell listed potential suspects. All the occupants of the castle, certain questionable personages from the village of Ballinrock, Tristan's ex-betrothed, and several neighboring clans. After much discussion, each was ticked off for lack of possible motive. Is it possible that Campbell had anything to do with it? Gwen asked. Because they killed Diagus in the other reality, she clarified. Sylvan shook his head. I do not see those two events being related, my dear. Colin Campbell had never come against us, and his holdings are vast enough that even now, he has difficulty protecting his territory. Besides, there's an issue of enchantment. 'Twould take another druid or a witch to do such a thing. The Campbells have no such arts. Gwen sighed. So what are we going to do? The only thing we can do. Take all precautions. We'll triple the guard rotations I'll send them out combing the countryside, and we'll wait. Now that we don't, now that we know there is a threat, it shouldn't be too difficult to avert. Justin will go nowhere unaccompanied. Robert, our captain of the guard, will serve as his taster. And in the meantime, Nell said. Oh, whoops. And in the meantime, Nell said, asking Gwen's hand, we women folk will set our minds to happier things. Mayhap select the room you wish to use when you have your reborn. Sylvan turned to a beatific gaze upon them. Gwen didn't miss the way his gaze lingered over long on Nell, nor did she miss the heated glance that passed between them. Seems they finally came to their senses without my help. This phone. Maybe I want to go back to the 16th century. I don't know. I can't deal with the cold. And Scotland's pretty freaking cold. All right. She might have been mortified. It's this cord. It's got to be. Damn thing. All right. She might have been mortified that she'd known just how she'd helped him. Aye, now there's the sound plan. And rest easy, my dear. We'll avert the threat. For the next few days, Gwen immersed herself in plans for the future. Driston was a strong man, smart, and his castle was well fortified. Now that they were aware of the impending threat, they would indeed unmask the enemy, and life would be all that she ever dreamed it to be. Or would it? Chapter 23. Besetta's eyes were dark with terror as she watched the McKeltar guard thunder past the cottage. The news she'd overheard in Ballinach earlier today was true. The guards were returning with Driston's betrothed. She hadn't even known they'd ridden out to fetch her, thanks to Nevin's refusal to discuss the goings-on in the castle. Now she had arrived, the woman that would kill her son. Ooh, getting interesting. Drama! All right. Trembling, Besetta crept away from the window and nearer the fire. She rubbed her hands together, trying in vain to dismiss a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The chill was in her heart, ne'er to be thawed lest she secure her son's future. She bartered for the gypsy service several days earlier, but unaware of the lord's betrothed was arriving so soon. More of Nevin's fault for being so close-lipped. She had not specified the date for Driston's abduction. She'd planned to use herbs to drug the lord, then have it lured back to the Lux where, helpless, he would be enchanted. Now she had a better idea. She would go to the gypsy camp this very night and instruct them to act immediately, take his betrothed and use her as lure, then enchant them both. She snatched up her cloak and trembling fingers and hurried to the door. Nevin was still at the castle, and would be for several hours if he stayed true to his schedule, utterly oblivious to the danger all around him. She squeezed her eyes tightly shut, clutching the door and steeling her will. It was almost over. Just one more day. Brave the gypsy camp one more time, and her son would be safe. And mayhap, just mayhap, that horrible sucking darkness would finally leave her alone. Bom, bom, bom. Probably nothing. I don't know. Do they even make blimps anymore? Brandon, I like your questions. Is there a reason why you're asking about popping balloons? Just wondering. You know, one of those random questions. The evening Justin returned. Gwen, Sylvan, and Nell, alerted by the guard that rode ahead, waited on the front steps of the castle. Gwen felt her heart might burst from happiness. Her gaze lingered long on the two magnificent men, talking, clapping each other on the shoulder, and jesting as they dismounted, and the stable master led their horses away. She'd had a part in that, she thought, smiling. First goal accomplished. Justin's brother was safe. When Justin reached the bottom step, she flung herself into his arms. He swung her up into his embrace and kissed her hungrily. By the time he'd finished, she was gaping for air and laughing. My turn, Diagus laughed. I do not think so, Justin growled. Then his scowl faded and he smiled at his brother. My American, 'tis like a dream. I still recall standing in her sentry, mourning you, brother. Have a care with yourself. I never want to suffer that again. I expect you to live 100 years or more. I plan to, Diagus assured him. Then he smiled at Gwen, and she caught her breath. For a moment, she thought him nearly as gorgeous as Justin, those lion-like golden eyes of his. She glanced up at Tristan, who had an arched brow, watching her. They're identical twins, okay? They're identical twins, except for, like, slight differences. And they're both living in the same castle. That's gonna fuck her up. I would be like, listen, Diagus, love you, bro, but, like, you gotta go. Like, for my own sanity. I'm married now. Bye. Peace out, bro. Oh, come on, she said lightly. I can't possibly not notice how attractive he is. He's as much as he looks like you. Justin rumbled deep in his throat. But I married you. Oh, wait. But I married you, she said pertly. Oi, that you did, Les. That she did, Diagus, Justin said pointedly. Do not be getting yourself a fankle, Diagus said lightly. 'Tis plain her heart is only for you. If you'll recall, she didn't care for my kiss. Justin growled again. Diagus laughed. 'Tis thanking you I am, Gwen Cassidy. Justin tells me he regained his memory when you said the spell. The battle occurred as you predicted. 'Twould seem I owe you my life. No, Gwen protested. I'm happy I could help, and I'm glad that you're all right. 'Tis an old custom. I shall always protect you and yours, he said, his golden eyes glittering. And there is a small fact that you may have made my brother happier than I ever seen him. So I'm thanking you doubly, lass. Welcome to our family. Aw, that's so sweet. He still wants to hit it. So he's gonna, like, sneak into her bedchamber one night when Tristan's away and be like, what's up, girl? He's not even gonna say nothing. He's just gonna be in there, and she's not even gonna realize because she's not gonna be able to see because it's the 16th century and they only use candles. Gwen's eyes misted. She was part of a family now. Justin's arms tightened and he swung her legs up, cradling her. She tipped her head back for another leisurely kiss. Diagus grinned and shook his head.
Turning to greet his father, he paused, noting Sylvan's arm about Nell's waist. Justin noticed at the same time. His eyes widened and he glanced at Gwen. She shrugged, smiling. I don't know what happened, but ever since you left, you've been acting different. It seems they finally admitted their feelings for each other. Diagus tossed his head back and gave a whoop of joy. He grabbed Nell and kissed her soundly on the mouth. Nell flushed, looked immensely relieved, and Gwen realized she must have been nervous about how Justin and Diagus may feel about her relationship with their father. Stop that! Oh, no. Hold on. Stop with that, Sylvan growled. Kiss her cheek if you wish, but do not be kissing those lips. They're mine. Nell's laughter was joyous, and she and Gwen exchanged a purely feminine smile. I got like super girly giggles now. Hold on. Okay. Possessiveness in tiny doses could be delicious. Diagus grinned. So our dolt of a da has finally opened his eyes. Sylvan looked sheepish. Diagus plucked Nell up and twirled her around in a dizzying circles. 'Tis long past time you took your seat at our table, Nell. I take this means you approve, Sylvan said dryly. Oh, aye, we approve, Diagus and Justin said simultaneously. When Diagus deposited Nell near Sylvan, only Gwen noticed the faint hint of sadness in Diagus's eyes, buried deep behind the golden glitter. She might not have noticed it at all, had she not experienced it herself. It was loneliness. Where would Diagus McKelter, brother to a man who'd been jilted 4 times? You did break the betrothal, didn't you? She tipped her head back at Justin, narrowing her eyes. Aye. Seems Anaya didn't care for me calling down a storm during battle. Druid extraordinaire, gorgeous beyond words, find a woman to wed him in all of Alba? And Diagus knew it, although Tristan hadn't realized it yet. Did he make his eyes glow and everything? She teased, eyeing Diagus thoughtfully. It was most impressive, Diagus informed her. You should have seen him raise his arms to the sky and make quite a performance of it, when in truth it doesn't require much effort. An arrow with the right element shot into a certain cloud formation. Oh, you must tell me. They both laughed, tossing similar manes of silky dark hair. I didn't call down a storm. I told her that if she broke our betrothal, she could retain her bride price to use as a future dowry. He grimaced. It seemed she didn't wish to wed me anyway. She'd been pining for another. She said her dad gave her no choice, as they had need of coin. Oh, Tristan, Gwen thought, doomed never to be appreciated by the woman in his century. And Diagus, there was going to be some serious matchmaking efforts in her future. Where on earth would she find him a wife, she wondered. Then she wondered no more, for Tristan turned with her in his arms and loped up the stairs into the castle to make immediate, passionate love to her. She was quite certain as her body quickened with the anticipation. Wait, Sylvan called after them. I thought we could dine together as a family. Give over, Da. I doubt they'll be leaving the bedchamber till morn, Diagus said dryly. Sylvan sighed, then glanced at Nell. His gaze grew heated. When Sylvan took Nell's hand and hastened her toward the stairs, bidding a good night over his shoulder to his son, Daigus shook his head, smiling faintly, and withdrew a flask of whiskey from his sporran. Daigus sat on the steps for a long time, filled with a strange restlessness that even whiskey couldn't mellow, watching the night sky twinkle with a smattering of brilliant stars. If he felt lonely in this vastness of thing, 'twas a feeling to which he'd grown long accustomed. Aw, Daigus can come to my century. Bad girl. All right. Oh, maybe in the bar that wasn't Justin. Maybe that was Daigus. Because he was all alone drinking his whiskey. God. Gwen welcomed her husband home in a time-honored fashion. They spent the evening in their chamber, where she lovingly bathed the dust of travel from him, then joined him in a fresh bath, showed him how very much she missed him. Didn't they not bathe in the 16th century? Wasn't it like ungodly or something? Well, they're druids. Never mind. They lit candles and drew the velvet bed curtains, alternately making love and stopping to feed each other tidbits from scrumptious dinner delivered personally by Daigus. It was clear that from the array of foods, Gwen decided that Daigus had quite an erotic mind, just like his brother, for he'd brought them lover's food, juicy slices of peaches and plums, baked meat tarts, cheese, and a crusty loaf of bread. He'd also brought honey with nothing specific to put it on, a thing that she'd not understood. Until Justin laid her back upon the bed, drizzled a dab on the most feminine parts of her, then proceeded to show her how long it would take to lick it off thoroughly. And I'll go ahead and tell you that causes like an immediate yeast infection, so don't do that. So she'd peeked twice beneath his masterful, slightly sticky tongue. Then there were cherries from the orchard, and she'd eaten a handful while trying her own hand at the honey. Justin had lain supine upon the bed for all of 2.5 minutes before flipping her over on her back and taking charge of matters. She'd revealed in eroding his control. For such a disciplined man, he certainly came undone in bed. Uninhibited, passionate, and with enthusiasm for sex was endless. She'd fed him slices of roast pig, then given him small drinks of wine from her very lips. When he'd whispered to her the same base, primitive words back that she had said to him in the first night together in the stones, untamed lust had consumed them both. They rolled across the bed, tumbled to the floor, knocking over tables, candles, and setting fire to the lambskin rug. They laughed, and Justin had doused it with the cooling bath water. When she finally slept, spooned her back to his front, with Justin's arms around her, her last thought was heaven. She'd found heaven in the Highlands of Scotland. Chapter 24. Gwen sighed contentedly. She'd been having a marvelous dream in which Justin was waking her by making love to her. Dimly, the realization penetrated at the same moment he did, that this was no dream. She gasped as, still spooned, he slipped into her from behind. Oh, God, she breathed as he increased the tempo. Deeper, harder, faster. He thrust into her, her arms wrapped tightly, his arms wrapped tightly around her, and nipped at the skin of the base of her neck. When he rolled her nipples between his fingers, she arched back against him, meeting his every thrust until they peaked in perfect harmony. "Gwen, my love," he whispered. When later he'd gone to fetch breakfast, intended on serving her in bed, she lay back, a silly smile plastered on her face. Life was so good. Whistling a cheery tune, Drustin balanced a tray laden with kippers and plump sausages, tatties and clooty dumplings, peaches and porridge on his arms as he fumbled with the door. All had been prepared by Nell herself, all tasted by Robert. Despite the fact that the threat loomed some distance yet in the future, he was taking no chances with his wife. "Sustenance is here, and if you're going to need it, love," he announced, pushing the door open. The velvet bed curtains were tied back, revealing a tangle of coverlets and linens, but the bed was empty. He glanced around about the room, puzzled. He'd been gone scant half an hour gathering food. Where'd she go? A quick visit to the garderobe? He had a delicious morning planned. A leisurely breakfast, a leisurely bath for his wife, who must be aching from so much bed play. More love-making only if she was able. If not, he would massage scented oils into her skin and gently minister to her tender limbs. A chill of foreboding kissed his spine as he eyed the empty bed. Dropping the tray on a table near the door, he walked swiftly to the boudoir and into the silver chamber. But she wasn't there. He pivoted and stalked back to his chamber. Only then did he see the parchment propped on the table near the fire. His hands shook as he snatched it up and read, "Come to the clearing by the wee loch if ye value her life. Alone, or the last dies." "Nay," he roared, crushing the parchment in his fist. "'Tis too soon," his mind protested. He wasn't supposed to be enchanted for nearly a fortnight. He hadn't even given the guards instructions to triple the watches and scour the countryside. "By American," he whispered hoarsely, "we've changed things somehow. By preventing Diagas's death, they may have altered the way the subsequent events would unfold." His mind raced furiously. Who was behind it all? It made no sense to him, and what might be the enemy want with Gwyneth? "To get me," he muttered grimly. They hadn't drugged him this time. Rather, because Gwen was there, she'd been used as bait. Frantically, he crammed to his feet into his boots and grabbed his leather bands, strapping them on. In the great hall, he stuffed blade after blade into the slits as he raced into the garrison. "Alone, my arse," he thought. "I'll walk in alone while my men sneak up behind them and destroy every last one of the bastards that took my woman." Basetta cowered behind the lofty cloak, watching the gypsies prepare to work the spell she had commissioned. They painted a large crimson circle upon the ground. Runes that she had not recognized marked the perimeter. Dark gypsy magic, she thought, shivering. The moment Nevin had departed for his morning stroll to the castle, she hastened from the cottage and crept through the forest. She was determined to see the deed done in her own eyes. Only then would she believe her son safe. She narrowed her eyes, peering at her enemy, Justin's betrothed, who had been plucked straight from his bed. She was fair certain for the lass wore naught but a sheer night rail. Soon the Lord himself would arrive, and the gypsies would enchant him and take him far away to be interred underground, and her worries would be over. The gypsies had demanded extra coin to enchant the woman as well. forcing Becerra to pilfer from Nelvin's charity box, but no transgression was too great to save her son. A few yards away, Nevin watched his mother with a heavy heart. For some time, she'd been worsening, her moods growing increasingly erratic, her eyes too bright. She watched him carelessly, as if she feared a bolt of lightning might strike him at any moment. He'd done all that he could to allay her fears that Justin McKelter might harm him, but to no avail. She was lost in terrible imaginings. He murmured a soft prayer of thanks to God for guiding him. He'd awakened with a niggling foreboding, and rather than immediately striking out for the castle, he lingered behind the cottage. Sure enough, the moments later, after his mother had slipped out, wild-eyed, her hair mussed, half-dressed, pulling her cloak tightly around her. When she'd scurried off, he followed at a distance. She crept to the edge of the forest where it opened to a circular clearing at the edge of the small loch. Now he watched, deeply uneasy. What was his mother doing? What involvement had she in gypsy affairs, and what strange designs were etched upon the sod? He scanned the clearing, stiffened when a small group of gypsy moved apart and one broke away from the rest, carrying a bound woman toward the crimson circle. It was the wee blonde lass Nevin he'd seen about the castle as of late. When the gypsy briefly glanced at his direction, Nevin tucked deeper into the brush, deeper into the shadows of the forest. What ominous events transpired? Why did his mother lurk here? And why was the woman from the castle bound? What terrible things had Becerra gotten herself ensnared in? Smoothing his robes, he reminded himself that he was a man of God, and in such a duty to work in his name, despite the slightly stature and mild nature. Whatever was about to happen, it was clear no good might come of it. It was his responsibility to put a stop to it before someone was harmed. He began to step forth from his hidden vantage, but no sooner did he stand than Justin McKelter, mounted on a snorting black stallion, burst into the clearing. He vaulted from his horse, and unsheathing his sword, stalked toward the gypsy carrying the lass. "Release her!" Justin roared savagely in a voice that sounded like 1,000 voices. His silvery eyes blazed incandescently. 'Twas no normal voice, what Nevin realized, but a voice of power. Nevin ducked back again, blinking. The gypsy carrying the blonde lass dropped her as if burned and back away towards the loch. The lass tumbled and rolled across the rocky sod, stopping a few yards from where Nevin stood. And that was when all hell broke loose. Night, Monster GM. Hope you have a good night. I'll have to go back and rewatch your stream from earlier. I apologize that I missed it. Becerra keened low and long as chaos erupted in the clearing. She wiped clammy palms on her shirt and watched in horror as mounted guards burst from the forest. The gypsies hemmed in the loch by their back, and the guards on all sides reached for their weapons. Wrong! Wrong! It was all wrong! She inched from the cover of the forest, creeping unnoticed in the tumult, toward the wagon that had been brought to cart off the large slumbering body. The gypsies were aiming their crossbows, the guards were raising their shields and swinging their swords. Men were going to die, and blood was going to flow. Becerra thought gratefully that Nevin was safely in the castle working on his chapel. Mayhap, rather than being enchanted, Justin McKelter would be killed in battle, not by her hand at all. Mayhap. But Mayhap was too weak for the possibility to ensure her son's safety. "I will not harm the McKelter," she promised Nevin, and she was a woman of her word. If a son couldn't trust his mother's word, what could he rely on? She carefully planned the enchantment so that not one hair on the lard's head would be harmed. But now all her cautious plans were going awry. She had no choice but to try another option to save her son. If she could not remove Justin McKelter before he wed his lady, well, she'd made no promises about that lady. And that lady was currently forgotten as the battle raged around her bound body. Lying on the ground, she may or may not have tripled by the... Wait. Lying on the ground, she may or may not get trampled by the horses, may or may not get struck by a stray arrow. Basetta was quite finished taking chances. If Justin survived the battle, Basetta had to make certain there was no woman for him to wed. She narrowed her eyes, watching the last struggle with her bonds, and inched nearer the wagon. With trembling hands, she plucked up a tightly strung crossbow, and summoning every ounce of her strength, leveled it at the lass. Nevin's eyes widened in horror. His mother, his own mother, would do murder. She had truly lost in her madness. "Thou shalt not kill." "Nay," he roared, plunging from the bush. Basetta heard him and started. Her hand slipped on the cord. "Nay, mother!" Running, he catapulted himself through the air to shield the bound lass and stumbled, landing sideways atop her. "Nay!" His cry terminated abruptly as the arrow slammed into his chest. I'm gonna cry. She just shot her son. Like, that hurt my heart. Nay. Stop. You're an ass, Daniel. Oh, shit. That's so sad, though. She was trying so hard to save her son in all of this that she was the one who ended up killing him. Basetta froze. Her world grew eerily still. The tumult in the clearing receded and grew hazy, as if she stood in a dreamy tunnel, she at one end, her dying son at the other. Choking on a horrified sob, her knees buckled and she collapsed. Bro, for real. Oh my god, this is making me so sad. Helicopter moms never learn. Her vision swept over her again, this time in full, and she finally saw the fourth person's face. The person that she thought had meant naught since she had been unable to see clearly. She had not been able to see the fourth person because it had been herself. She was the woman who would kill her son. It had never been the lass. Indirectly in a way, for had that lass not come, Basetta would not have planned to abduct the Lord, and had she not set such plans into motion, she would have never have shot her beloved son. God's will be, Nevin had said 1,000 times, if once. But trusting her visions more than God, she tried to change what she thought she'd seen and brought about the very event that she tried so desperately to avoid. She fancied she could hear her son's ragged, dying breaths over the din of battle. Oblivious to the warfare all around her, the arrows flying, the swords swinging, she crawled to her son's side and tugged him onto her lap. "Oh, my wee laddie," she crooned, smoothing his hair, stroking his face. "Nevin, my baby, my boy." Gwen struggled to sit up the moment she was no longer pinned by the man's body. A sob escaped her when she spied the arrow protruding from his bloody chest. She'd never seen anyone shot before. It was horrible, worse than the movies made it seem. She tried to inch away, but her wrists were bound behind her, her ankles tightly tied. Scooting awkwardly on her behind was painstakingly slow going. When a horse screamed and reared behind her, then she heard the chilling swish of a blade slicing through the air. She went utterly still and decided moving might not be the wisest course of action. Justin had been gone only a few minutes when the gypsies had slipped into the chamber and taken her captive. They'd subdued her with humiliating ease. She hadn't seen it coming, but somehow, by preventing Diagas's death, they changed things. Plans had been accelerated, and rather than a message bidding Justin to come if he wished to know the name of the man who killed his brother, she had been used as lure. She stared at the weeping old woman whose frantic, gnarled hands fluttered above the man's cheeks and brow. As Gwen watched, his chest rose and fell, and then did not rise again. "'Twas me all along," Basetta wailed. "'Twas my vision that did this. You never have bargained with the gypsies." "You arranged to enchant Drustin?" Gwen gasped. This gray-haired old woman with arthritic hands and rheumaty eyes was their unknown enemy? "You're the one behind everything?" But the old woman didn't reply, merely stared at Gwen with loathing and madness in her gaze. "Gwen," Tristan roared, "get away from Basetta." Gwen's head snapped back, and she saw him running toward her, a horrified expression on his face. "Kroll, get away!" he roared again, dodging swords and ducking arrows. "Stay back," Gwen screamed. "Protect yourself." He could never make it through so many weapons. But he didn't stay back. He kept running, heedless of the danger. He was no more than a dozen yards from her when an arrow slammed into his chest, taking him off of his feet as he collapsed on his back. Suddenly, she was on the flat rock, sunning herself in the footness of Loch Ness. "No!" she screamed. "Trustin!" Man. Johnny Moosh, what's up, bro? The release of atom power has changed everything except for our way of thinking. The solution to this problem lies in the heart of mankind. If only I had known, I should have become a watchmaker. Albert Einstein. The heart has its reasons, of which reason knows nothing. Blaise Pascal. Gwen lay on the flat rock for a time unaccounted. She was mindless, racked with grief. When a sip of reality finally returned, it couched an impossible pill to swallow. Reality without him forever. How had she, the brilliant physicist, failed to see it coming? How could she have been so stupid? She had been so thrilled to remain with Justin in the 16th century, so lost in dreamy plans of their future, that her brain had gone on strike, and she failed to take one critically important factor into account. The moment she changed his future, she would change her own. In the new future they created, Driston McKeltar was not enchanted, was not buried in the cavern for her to find. And so, in this new future they'd created, because Driston was not enchanted, she'd not found him, and he'd never send her back to him. At the precise moment of the possibility of him being enchanted had reached absolute null, when Cassidy had ceased to exist in his century. Reality had plunked her right back where she'd been before she'd fallen down the ravine, right back when she'd been. No need for the white bridge. 16th century reality had spat her out, rejecting her very existence, an unacceptable anomaly. Justin was never enchanted, hence she had no right to exist in his time. So much for the theories that claimed Stephen Hawking so wrong for advocating the existence of a cosmic sensor that would prevent paradoxes from piling up. There was clearly some force keeping things aligned in the universe. God abhors a naked singularity, Gwen thought, with a half snort that quickly translated into a sob. She clutched her head, suddenly fearing her memories might melt away. But no, the scientist reminded her. The arrows of time remembered forward, and so her memory would remain intact. She had been in the past, and the memory of it was etched into the essence of her being. How had she failed to realize that by saving him, she would lose him forever? Now, looking back, she couldn't believe she'd not once thought through to what the inevitable finale would have to be. Love had blinded her, and in retrospect, she realized that she hadn't wanted to think about what might happen. She studiously blocked thinking about anything to do with physics, busy savoring the simple joy of being a woman in love. No, she cried. How am I supposed to live without him? Tears slipped down her cheeks. She scanned the rocky terrain, seeking the ravine down which she tumbled, but even that was gone. There was no longer a crevice splitting the northeast face of the foothills. The gypsies must have had some part in creating it, she realized, perhaps lowering him through it. Who knew? What she did know was that even if she dug beneath the mountain of rubble upon which she perched, she would find no sleeping Highlander beneath it. No, she cried again. Yes, the scientist whispered. He's 500 years dead. He'll come through the stones for me, she insisted. But he wouldn't, and she didn't need the scientist to point that out. He couldn't. Even if he had survived the arrow wound, he'd never use the stones. It would be like someone saying to her, if you finish your research, create the ultimate weapon, and unleash it upon an unsuspecting world, you can have Justin back. She could never release such capacity for evil, no matter the enduring grief. Nor would he. His honor, one of many things that she loved about him, would keep them forever apart, even if he had survived. Gwen dropped her head against the rock, scooped her pack to her arms, and clenched it tightly. She might never know if he died from the arrow wound, but he hadn't died in battle. He'd still died nearly 500 years ago. Grief smothered her. Grief more intense than anything that she had ever imagined. She buried her face in the pack and wept. It was hours before she managed to force herself up from the rocks and hike down to the village. Hours in which she sobbed as if her heart would break. Once in the village, she'd gone to her room and checked in, but wasn't able to bear being alone, so she walked numbly down to the inn's cozy restaurant, hoping to find Beatrice and Bertie, not to talk. She could hardly talk about it, but to be buffered by their warm presence. Now, standing in the doorway of the dining room, she blinked as she glanced around the brightly lit interior. I will not start crying again, Gwen told herself fiercely. She would weep later, after she'd returned home to Santa Fe. She would fall apart there. The restaurant felt strange and modern to her after being in the 16th century. The small fireplace on the south wall of the dining room seemed miniature compared to the medieval hearths. The neon bar decoration garnished after weeks of soft candlelight and oil globes. The dozens of tables topped with vases of fresh wildflowers seemed too small to seat guests with any degree of comfort. The modern world felt so impersonal to her now, with everything churned about in a mass, uniformed shapes and styles. Her gaze drifted over a cigarette vending machine in the corner. Dimly, she realized she passed through the worst of withdrawal in the 16th century. Still, she felt an utterly self-destructive urge to wash over her. Her gaze was drawn to a yellowed calendar that hung behind the cash register. September 19th. It was the same day that she'd left. But of course, she thought, no time would have passed. Perhaps a mere few moments had slipped by in the 21st century while she lived the happiest days of her life in the 16th century Scotland. She sniffed, perilously close to tears again, glancing around, thinking Bert's rainbow ensemble would be easy to spot. She nearly missed the lone silver-haired woman huddling in one of the booths that lined the bank of windows, silhouetted against the gathering twilight. The gloaming cast Beatrice's complexion in bruised shadows, and Gwen was struck by how old she looked. Her shoulders were hunched, her eyes closed. Her wide-brimmed hat was crushed between her hands. As a car drove by outside the bank of windows, headlights illuminated the elderly woman's face, revealing shiny trails of tears on her cheeks. Oh, God! Beatrice weeping? Why? Stricken, Gwen rushed to the booth. What could make a cheerful Beatrice weep? And where was Bertie? From what Gwen knew of the love-struck couple, the only way Bert would leave Bee's side was if he physically was incapable of being there. A chill brushed her neck. Beatrice? She said faintly. Beatrice jerked, startled. The eyes she raised to Gwen's were red-rimmed with crying, deep with grief. No, Gwen breathed. Tell me something has happened to Bert, she insisted. Tell me. Suddenly limp, she slumped into the booth across from Beatrice and took the older woman's hand in hers. Please, she begged. Oh, Gwen, my Bertie's in the hospital, she admission. The admission brought on a fresh bout of tears. Plucking another napkin from the dispenser, Beatrice wiped her eyes, blew her nose, then deposited the wadded napkin atop a substantial pile. What happened? He was fine just this morning, Gwen protested, having a difficult time keeping the date straight. He seemed fine to me, too. We'd been shopping all morning after you left, laughing and having a fine time. He was even feeling frisky, she said with a pained smile. Then it happened. He went abruptly still and just stood there by the most startled and angry look on his face. Beatrice's eyes filled with more tears as she relived the moment. Then he clutched his chest and I knew. She wiped impatiently at her cheeks. The damn man never takes care of himself. Wouldn't his cholesterol checked. Wouldn't get his blood pressure tested. A few days ago, I finally managed to wring a promise from him that once we got back home, he would get a complete physical. She broke off, wincing. But he's alive, right? She asked faintly. Tell me he's alive. She couldn't bear any more tragedy today, not one more ounce. He's alive, but he had a stroke, Beatrice whispered. Although they've stabilized him, they don't know how much damage was done. He's still unconscious. I'm going back up to the hospital in a few minutes. The nurses insisted I get a breath of fresh air. I couldn't stop crying, I guess. I guess I was pretty loud, and the doctor was getting upset with me. I thought I'd get some soup and tea before I went back for the night. So here I am. And she waved a hand at the plastic container of soup and sandwich to go. Oh, Beatrice, I'm so sorry, she breathed. I don't know what to say. Tears had been holding back, slipped down her cheeks. Tears for Justin and now tears for Bea and Bertie. Dearie, are you crying for me? Oh, Gwen. Slipping over to Gwen's side of the booth, she hugged her, and they clung to each other for a long time. And something inside Gwen broke. Wrapped in Beatrice's motherly arms, the pain of it all crashed over her. How unfair to love so deeply and to lose. How unfair life was. Beatrice had only just found her Bert, such as Gwen had only just found her Tristan. And now they both were to suffer endlessly for losing them? Better not to love, Gwen whispered bitterly. No, Beatrice chided gently. Never think that. Better to love and lose. An old adage is true. But I never had another moment with my Bertie. I would still feel blessed. These past months with him have been giving me more love and passion some people never know. Besides, he's going to be all right. If I have to sit by his bed and hold his hand and yell at him until he gets better, then tote his ornery butt to the doctor every week and learn how to cook without fat or butter or a damn thing worth eating, then I'll do it. I'm not letting that man get away from me. She fisted her ring, beckoned hand, and shook it at the ceiling. You can't have him yet. He's mine still. A bit of laughter escaped Gwen, mingled with fresh tears. If only it was so easy for her. If only she could fight for her man the way that Beatrice could fight for hers. But hers was 5 centuries dead. She became aware, after a moment, that Beatrice was regarding her intently. The older woman cupped Gwen's shoulders and searched her gaze. Oh, dearie, what is it? It looks to me as if you might be having problems of your own, she fretted. Gwen tucked her bangs behind her ear and averted her gaze. "It's nothing," she said. "Don't try to put me off," Beatrice chided. "Bertie would tell you that there's no point once I set my mind on a thing. It's only my problem with Bertie that's made you cry." "It's not only my problems with Bertie that made you cry." "Really," she protested, "you have enough problems. So take my mind off of them for a moment, if you will," Beatrice pressed. "Grief shared is grief lessened. What happened to you today? Did you find your, cherry picker?" Beatrice's blue eyes twinkled just a bit, and Gwen marveled that the older woman could still sparkle at such a moment. Had she found her cherry picker? She fought a bubble, nearly hysterical laughter. How could she tell Beatrice that she lived almost a month in a single day? Or at least she thought she had. It was so strange coming down from the foothills to find that no time at all had passed. She was beginning to fear for her sanity. Yet Beatrice was right. Grief shared with grief lessened. She wanted to talk about him, needed to talk about him. How could she possibly confine her pain unless... "It's really nothing. How about if I tell you a story instead to take your mind off things?" "A story?" Bee's eyebrows disappeared beneath her silvery curls. "Yes, I've been thinking about trying my hand at writing, and I've been kicking around a story, but I'm stumped on the ending." Beatrice's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "A story, you say?" "Yes, I'd like to hear it, and maybe you and I will be able to figure out the ending as should we go." Gwen took a deep breath and began. "Okay. The heroine is a girl who was hiking in the foothills of Scotland, and she found an enchanted Highlander sleeping in a cave above Loch Ness. Pretty far out there, huh?" An hour later, Gwen watched Beatrice open her mouth several times, then close it again. She fussed with her curls, fiddled with her hat, then smoothed her pink sweater. "At first I thought you were going to tell me about something that happened to you today that you didn't want to own up to." Beatrice shook her head. "But Gwen, I had no idea you had such an imagination. You truly took my mind off my worries for a time." "Goodness," she exclaimed, waving the plastic container. "Long enough that I ate that I was certain I wouldn't be able to force the bite down. Dearie, you must finish this story. You can't just leave the hero and heroine laying like that. I can't stand it. Tell me the end." "What if there is no end, Bee? What if that's all of it? What if she got sent back to her time, that he died, and that's it?" "You can't write such a story. Find a way to bring them through the stones." "He can't," Gwen said flatly. "Ever. Even if he lived." "Oaths are a lot of nonsense when love's at stake," Beatrice insisted. "Bend the rules. Just write that rule out." "I can't. It's part of the story. He would become a dark druid if he did." And Gwen understood how awful that would be, better than most ever could. Not one of his clan had ever broken the oath. They must not. And in truth, I'm afraid I would think less of him if he did. Beatrice arched her brow. You might think less of him." Gwen shook her head sheepishly. "I mean, my heroine in the story, she might think less of him. He was perfect the way he was. He was a man of honor who knew his responsibilities, and that one of the things she loved about him. If he broke his oath and used the stones for personal reasons, he would corrupt the power within him. There's no telling how evil he would become. No, if he lived, which I greatly doubt, he would never come through the stones for her." You're the storyteller. Don't let him die, Beatrice protested. Fix the story, Gwen, she said sternly. How dare you tell me such a sad story? Gwen met her gaze levelly. What if it's not just a story? She said softly. Beatrice studied her a moment, then glanced out the window into the twilight. Her gaze shifted from left to right over Loch Ness in the distance. Then she smiled faintly. There's magic in these hills. I've felt it ever since we arrived, as if the natural laws of the universe don't quite apply to this country. She paused and glanced back at Gwen. Hey, Victor! When my Bertie gets better, I might take him up to the hills myself, under a good doctor's care, of course, and rent a small cottage for the rest of the fall. Let some of that magic soak into his old bones. Gwen smiled sadly. Speaking of Bertie, I'll walk you back to the hospital. Let's go see what the doctors can tell us. And if you need to cry, I'll do the talking. Although Beatrice put up a token protest, Gwen didn't miss the relief and gratitude in her eyes. Gwen was relieved too, because she suspected she might not be able to bear being alone for quite some time. Gwen spent the rest of her holiday in the village by the deep glossy knock and with Beatrice, never looking up into the foothills, never venturing forth from the village, never allowing herself to even consider going to see if the castle shelter still stood. She was too raw, the pain too fresh. While Beatrice visited Bertie at the hospital, Gwen huddled beneath the covers, feeling feverish with grief. The prospect of returning home to her empty little apartment in Santa Fe was more than she could bear to contemplate. When Beatrice returned in the evening, exhausted by her own worries, they confided in each other, forced each other to eat something healthy, and took slow walks beside the huge silvery mirror of Loch Ness and watched the setting sun paint the silvery surface crimson and lavender. And beneath the wild Scottish sky, Gwen and Beatrice bonded like mother and daughter. They tossed around her story on more than one occasion. Beatrice urged her to write it down, to turn it into a historical romance and send it to a publisher. Gwen demurred. It would never get published. It's way too far out there. Oh, I'd use the stones. That's not true, Beatrice argued. I read a vampire romance this summer that I adored. A vampire, of all things. The world needs more love stories. What do you think I read when I'm sitting in the hospital waiting to see if my Bertie will ever be able to speak again? Not some horror story. Maybe one day, Gwen had conceded, mostly to end the conversation. But she was beginning to consider it. If she couldn't have the happily ever after in real life, at least she could write it. Someone else could live it for a few hours. Despite her relentless grief, she refused to leave Beatrice's side until Bert was stable and Beatrice was in better spirits. Day by day, Bert grew stronger. Gwen was convinced he was healing from the sheer magnitude and depth of Beatrice's love for him. The day he was released, Gwen accompanied Beatrice to the hospital. His speech was impeded because the left side of his face was paralyzed, but the doctor said that in time and with therapy, he might regain considerable ground. Beatrice had said with a wink that she didn't care if he ever spoke clearly again, as long as all the other parts were in working order. Bert had laughed and written on the erasable memo board that they certainly were, and he'd be happy to demonstrate if everyone would quit fussing over him and leave him alone with his sexy wife. Gwen had smiled and watched with a mixture of joy and pain as Beatrice and Bert rejoiced in each other. Only after they wrung a promise from her that she should visit them in Maine for Christmas. Beatrice had indeed rented a lovely cottage on the loch for the fall. Did Beatrice help Gwen pack up and tuck her into a cab for the ride to the airport? As Gwen settled into the back seat, Beatrice shifted her ample bulk into the door and hugged her fiercely, kissing her forehead, nose, and cheeks. Both were misty-eyed. Don't you dare give up, Gwen Cassidy. Don't you dare stop loving. I may never know what happened to you the day up on the hills, but I know it did something that changed your life. There's magic in Scotland, but always remember, a heart that loves makes magic all on its own. Gwen shivered. I love you, Beatrice, and you take good care of Bertie, she added fiercely. Oh, I plan to. And I love you too. Beatrice stepped back. The driver closed the door. Once the cab pulled away from the curb, and she watched Beatrice until she was a small pink-clad speck in the distance, then gone. Gwen cried all the way to the airport. October 20th, present day. Chapter 26. Although Gwen had known by the age of 4 that objects derive color from their innate chemical structure, which absorbs certain wavelengths of light and reflects others, she now understood that the soul had a light of its own that colored the world too. It was an essential light, the light of joy, of wonder, and of hope. Without it, the world was dark. Didn't matter how many lights she had turned on. Everything was flat, gray, empty. Sleeping, she dreamed of him, her Highland lover. Waking, she lost him all over again. Most days she hurts too much to even open her eyes. So she stayed in bed in her tiny apartment, drapes pulled, lights off, phone unplugged, reliving every moment that they had spent together, alternately laughing and crying. On rare occasions, she tried to persuade herself to get out of bed, short of bathroom jaunts, to attend the queasy stomach, or stumbling to the door to pay the pizza guy. It wasn't working. She was mortally wounded, but her stupid heart kept pumping. I know that feeling all too well. Like, all too well. This is like describing my life, like in every bit. How was she supposed to live without him? She had been deceived by platitudes and cliches. Time did not heal all wounds. That's true. Time didn't do a damn thing. Truth was, time had stolen her lover away, and if she lived to be 100, even forbid she'd suffer that long, she'd never forgive time. That's silly, the scientist snuffed. Gwen groaned, rolling over on her side and pulling a pillow over her head. Leave me alone. You've never been any help to me. You didn't even warn me that saving him would make me lose him. I tried to, but you didn't want to hear me. I'm trying to help you now, the scientist said stiffly. You need to get up. Go away. You better get up, unless you want to sleep in that 3-day-old slice of pizza you just ate. Well, that was one way of getting out of bed. A shaking Gwen decided a few moments later as she weakly brushed her teeth. Seemed to be the only way she got up lately. Squinting, she braced herself before turning on the light so she could see to wipe off the toilet. Okay. The light hurt her eyes, and it took her several moments to adjust. When she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror, she gasped. She looked awful. Her hair was dull and tangled, her skin pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Her face looked gaunt, and her eyes defeated. She really needed to get herself together, she thought dimly. If not for you, then for the child, the scientist agreed. What? Her voice, so long unused, cracked. and the words escaped in a hoarse, disbelieving croak. Child? The child, you idiot, the scientist snapped. Gwen gaped, stunned, staring at her reflection. She peered at herself a long while, brows furrowed. Shouldn't her skin look radiant or something if she was pregnant? Shouldn't she have gained a little weight? She glanced dubiously down at her flat stomach, flatter than it had ever been in her life. She definitely lost weight, not gained. Don't tell me you can't do the math. When's the last time we had our period? Gwen felt a tiny bud of hope blossom in her heart. She squelched it firmly, a dangerous feeling. Hope. No way. She was not going that route. She'd hoped she was pregnant, only to be doubly crushed when she found out it wasn't true. It wouldn't destroy her. She was in bad enough shape already. She shook her head bitterly. The scientist was wrong this time. I'm not pregnant, she told her reflection flatly. I'm depressed. Big, big difference. It was simply stress making her period late, nothing more. It had happened before, during her great fit of rebellion. She had skipped 2 periods. Fine, so go crawl back in bed, keep eating stale pizza, and refuse to wonder why you've been getting sick. Blame it all on stress. When you lose our baby because you won't take care of yourself, then don't blame me. Lose our baby, she gasped. This lady's talking to herself. Sounds like me. Fear knifed through her and eyes flew wide. If there was even a remote possibility that she had a child of Justin's inside her, there was no way that she was losing it. And afraid though she was to hope, because of how awful the potential of disappointment might be, she acknowledged that there was more than a possibility. There was a probability that they had made love repeatedly, and she was not on birth control. She hadn't been so lost in misery. She might have considered it sooner. If she was pregnant and did anything to jeopardize the baby, she would just die. Stricken, she stumbled back into the bedroom, turning on the light, took a good look around, thinking hard, counting days, looking for clues. Her bedroom was a pigsty. Pizza boxes with half-eaten slices dotted the floor. Glasses with milk-encrusted bottoms were forgotten atop the bed table. Cracker wrappers were strewn across the bed, crackers she'd been nibbling on the morning to calm her queasy stomach. Oh, my God, she whispered. Oh, please let it be true. The wait to discover if she was pregnant was interminable. No at-home pregnancy test for Gwen Cassidy. She needed whatever news directly from a doctor. After giving both a urine and blood sample, Gwen tapped her foot and sat tensely in the crowded waiting room of her doctor's office. She felt wired from head to toe. She shifted position 12 times, changing chairs, fanned through every magazine in the office. She paced, periodically making sure the receptionist knew that she was still alive. The receptionist scowled each time she passed by, and Gwen suspected the woman thought she was mildly unbalanced. When Gwen had called earlier, nearly hysterical, insisting on seeing the doctor immediately, the receptionist had brusquely informed her that the Dr. Carolyn DeVar had no openings for several weeks. Gwen had pleaded and sobbed until finally the frustrated reception put Carolyn on the phone. Her dear, wonderful doctor since childhood, who'd become a friend over the years, had squeezed her in. Sit, the receptionist snapped, exasperated as Gwen paced by again. You're making the other patients nervous. Mortified, Gwen glanced around the room full of people and slunk back into her chair. Miss Cassidy? A nurse poked her head around the corner. That's me, she shocked back up and trotted after the nurse. That's me, she informed the receptionist brightly. A few moments later, she took a seat on the examining table. hugged herself in the chilly room. She sat, feet swinging, waiting. When the door opened and Carolyn DeVar stepped in, Gwen said breathlessly, "Well?" Pickle jars and empty ice cream cartons were stashed under the ice. Ranch dressing on everything. Ice cream, cereal, didn't matter. Ranch dressing, everything. The weirdest shit. Candy in wrappers. Marmalade toast that I would eat a whole loaf of at breakfast. Thank you kindly. Yep. I have the weirdest damn craving. Anyways. Carolyn closed the door, smiling. You were right. You're pregnant, Gwen. I am, she breathed, scarcely daring to believe it. Yes. Truly, she persisted. Absolutely and unequivocally. Gwen hopped off the table and hugged her. I love you, Carolyn. Oh, thank you. I can hardly take credit for it, but you're welcome. For several minutes, all Gwen could do was repeat, I'm pregnant, I'm pregnant, I'm pregnant, with delighted smile on her face. You need to gain weight, Gwen, Carolyn chided. I squeezed you in this afternoon because you sounded so awful on the phone, it worried me. She paused as if searching for a delicate way to continue. I know you lost both your parents this year. Her brown gaze was sympathetic. Gwen nodded tightly, smile fading. Grieving takes its toll. You're 10 pounds lighter than you were at your last checkup. I'm starting you on some supplements today and putting you on a special diet. It's fairly self-explanatory, but if you have any questions, call me. Eat. Feel free to stuff yourself. Go overboard for a while. She gave Gwen a folder of menu suggestions and a bag of sample supplements to tide her over until she went to the drugstore. Yes, ma'am, she promised. Scout's honor. I'll gain. I promise. Will the father be helping you? Carolyn asked carefully. Gwen took a deep breath. I'm strong. My baby is depending on me. He died. The word escaped in a soft rush of air. Merely saying it hurt her to the marrow of her bones. 500 years ago. She didn't say. Carolyn would have packed her off to a cushy padded hospital if she had said that. Oh, Gwen, explained, squeezing her hand. I am so sorry. Gwen glanced away, unable to meet Carolyn's sympathetic gaze. Simply kindness could undo her, make the tears come back. Carolyn must have sensed it, because her voice changed, becoming briskly professional again. I cannot stress this enough that you must gain weight. Your body is going to need special care, and I'd like to schedule you an ultrasound. An ultrasound? Why? Is something wrong? Gwen was alarmed, and her gaze flew back up to Carolyn's. No, nothing's wrong. In fact, she had a smiling, depending on your outlook, you might think it's something wonderful. Your HCG levels led me to believe that you're carrying twins. An ultrasound will give a definite answer. Oh my God, twins? Gwen cried. Twins, she repeated disbelievingly. Twins! Just like Justin and Digus. A chill raced through her. Not just one of his babies, but two? Ah, Justin, she thought. Lance, by piercing arrow. Twins, my love. How he would have rejoiced in the news. How he would have celebrated the birth of their children. But he would never know. Would never see his sons or daughters. She would never get to share with him. She closed her eyes against the wave of pain. Carolyn watched her closely. Are you all right, Gwen? You're so emaciated, and your friend told us your hallucinations were placing under the care of the state, and your pregnancy would be monitored by a social worker. You're an asshole, Daniel. Stop. Stop it. This is happier thoughts, damn it. Shut up. That's so bad. Shut up. Let me finish. I'm so close. This close to being done. Anyway. All right. Let me finish. All right. Where was I? Gwen nodded, her throat tight. After a long moment, she opened her eyes again. If you need to talk, Gwen, Carolyn trailed off, waiting. Gwen nodded stiffly. Thank you, but I think it's just going to take some time. She forced a weak smile. I'll be fine, Carolyn. I'll take care of myself, I promise. Nothing would jeopardize her babies. I'll squeeze you in again on Friday. Walking with her to the door. I'll have my receptionist call you this afternoon with the time. Gwen thanked her profusely. You have no idea how much I needed to know this. Gwen gazed at the dark circles beneath her eyes. I think I do, she said softly. Now go home, eat, and take care of yourself. There's more than just yourself to think about now. I'm not even going to read that. You hush. Gwen waved goodbye to the receptionist as she left. She was pregnant. She had a part of Drustin inside of her, a child of his, possibly two, to raise, to love, to cherish. Walking across the parking lot to her car, she was briefly stunned by how blue the sky seemed, how bright the sun, how green the grass. Color. There was light in her soul again. Chapter 27. A week later, Gwen was back in Scotland. She sat at the base of the McKelters mountain, perched on the hood of her rental car, gazing up, filled with trepidation. When Carolyn had confirmed that she was carrying twins, a surge of energy had flooded her. She'd cleaned her apartment, put the phone back on the hook, gotten her hair trimmed, treated herself to an eyebrow waxing, and gone grocery shopping. Then she called Allstate to tender her resignation, only to find they'd already fired her for not showing up for so many weeks. No loss there, she shrugged her philosophically. She had called a realtor and placed her parents' house on the market. The ostentatious showplace had been paid off years ago, and the sale of it would give her more than enough money to make a fresh start. She was done with Santa Fe. Done with the insurance claims, done with it all. She was thinking of moving to the East Coast, maybe Maine, near Bert and Beatrice. She'd buy a lovely house with a darling nursery. Perhaps get a job at a local university teaching math and making it fun. But before she could do any of that, before she could move forward, she had to somehow make peace with the past. And the only way to do that was to lay to rest the questions that drove her mad at 3 o'clock in the morning when her heart felt heavy and her soul was inclined to brood. Questions like, had Drustin died from the arrow wound or survived? If he had survived, had he ever married? She hated considering that one because it left her feeling so torn. She would be crushed if he had remarried, yet at the same time, she would be crushed if he spent the rest of his life grieving. She loved him so much that if he lived, she wanted him to have been happy. It hurt her to think that he may have grieved for 30 or 40 or 50 years. She realized that she was the lucky one. They'd both lost each other, but she alone had the precious gift of their babies. More questions. Had Diagus had children? Had any McKeltar descendants survived to the 21st century? The answer to that question could be a blessing, for if the McKeltars still lived above Alberath, she would feel as if they hadn't failed completely. One of the things that Drusted had wanted was to ensure the future succession of his clan, and if by saving Diagus they had guaranteed survival of his clan, he could have some small measure of satisfaction in that. Even more than finding answers, however, she needed to go sit by his grave, to lay strings of heather atop it, to tell him of their children, to laugh and reminisce and weep. Then she would go home and be strong for their babies. It was what Drustin would want. Steeling herself, she slipped back into the rental car. She didn't delude herself. She knew that whatever she found atop the mountain was going to be excruciating, because this was going to have to be the final goodbye. As Gwen topped the crest of the mountain, her eyes misted. The perimeter wall had been torn down, and the magic stones of Bandracaid towered against the brilliant, cloudless blue sky. There she had made love with her Highland mate. There she had traveled back into the past. There she had become pregnant, according to her due date. She'd known that seeing the stones again would hurt, because a part of her was tempted to hole up in a laboratory and try to figure out the formulas that danced so far beyond her comprehensions. The only thing that held her back was that Gwen knew, even as brilliant as she was, that she could devote the rest of her life to it, only to die a bitter old woman, never gaining the knowledge. She would not live her life like that, nor would she subject her children to it. The few times she pondered the symbols, she realized how far beyond her understandings they were. She might be a genius, but she just wasn't smart enough. Nor would she plead, if modern McKeltars still lived, with them to break their oaths and send her back and unleash a dark druid upon the world. No. She would be the woman Drustin had loved, honorable, ethical, loving. Thus resolved, she accelerated past the stones and lifted her gaze to the castle. She sucked in a deep breath. Castle Kelter was even more beautiful than it had been in the 16th century. A sparkling, many-tiered fountain had been constructed in the front lawn. It was surrounded by a lush tumbling of shrubbery and flowers and stone walkways. The facade had been renovated, probably many times over the centuries, and the front stairs were no longer stone, but had been replaced with rosy marble. An elegant matching marble banister framed both sides. What had once been huge wooden doors was now double doors, fashioned in a burnished cherry, trimmed with gold. Above the doors, a stained glass window detailing. Her heart leaped. The McKeltar plaid, shimmering brilliant purple in the sun. She parked before the steps and sat gazing at the door, wondering if that small bit of McKeltar heritage meant the castle was still inhabited by descendants. Suddenly the door opened and a young child, blonde curls tumbling about with a delicate face, stepped out, peering at her curiously. Inside the rented Volvo, Gwen squinted against the bright sunlight at the lovely little girl, who was followed closely by a boy of similar age and an older pair of twins. The eldest boy and girl took her breath away and eradicated any questions in her mind about whether any descendants had survived. They most certainly had. Pure McKeltar blood was apparent in both of the older children. In the rich dark manes and unusual eyes and golden skin, the boy could have been Adigas's own son with similar golden eyes. She closed her eyes briefly, fighting tears, feeling both joyous and sad. They hadn't failed completely, but the visit was going to be excruciating, she realized, massaging her temples. "Hello," the little girl called, knocking on the car window. "Will you be getting out, or will you be sitting in there all day?" Gwen snorted lightly, the pain easing a bit. She opened her eyes and smiled. The little girl was absolutely darling, peering in expectantly. "You're going to have 2 of those soon," a comforting voice reminded her. "Kara, get back from that car," a blonde woman who looked to be in her early 30s called, hurrying down the front steps. She was heavily pregnant, and Gwen instinctively touched her own abdomen. Turning off the ignition, she tucked their bangs behind her ear and opened the car door. She realized as she stepped out that she'd not thought of this far ahead. She had no idea what excuse she would offer for dropping in on perfect strangers. She would have to play it by ear, claim to be taken with the castle, then beg a tour. She was grateful that the woman was pregnant because she was willing to bet she would invite her in to visit without asking too many questions. Gwen had recently discovered that pregnant women were a breed unto their own, with a tendency to forge an innacious, deep bond. A few days ago, she had chatted for over an hour with a pregnant stranger in the ice cream aisle of the grocery, discussing baby clothes and tests and methods of birth. At all kinds of things that would bore a non-pregnant person silly. "I take it these lovely ones are yours," Gwen said, offering her friendliest smile. "Aye, my youngest are Corey and Cara," she said, turning towards them. Cara said hello again, and Corey smiled shyly. "And these," she waved her hand in the dark-haired teenage twins, "are Christian and Colin." They chimed hello together. "Plus I've got 2 on the way in a few months, as if it weren't obvious." "I'm pregnant with twins myself." Maggie's eyes flickered strangely. "'Tis easier that way," she said. "You get 'em over with 2 at a time. I always wanted a dozen or 2. I'm Maggie McKeltar, and my husband should be out in a moment." She turned the steps and shouted, "Christopher! Do hurry! She's here!" "Come in, love," deep baritone voice replied. Gwen frowned, puzzled, wondering what Maggie had meant by "she's here." Had they mistaken her for someone else? Perhaps they were expecting someone, she decided. Maybe they were hiring a nanny or maid and thought Gwen was that person. Kara tugged impatiently at Maggie's arm. "Mama, when are they going to show her?" "Hush, Maggie," said swiftly. "Run along with you and Corey. We'll be shortly. Christian, you and Colleen go help Miss Melbourne lay the tea at solar." "But, Mum," "Do I have to repeat myself?" "I'm going to have to clear up this case of mistaken identity," Gwen thought, watching the children go in. She didn't care for the thought of misleading Maggie McKeltar. Then all thought fled her mind as Maggie's husband, Christopher, stepped out of the castle. Gwen sucked in a breath, feeling suddenly faint. "Aye, the resemblance is strong, isn't it now?" Maggie said softly, watching her. A dark lock of hair fell over Christopher's forehead, and at the same extraordinary height and muscled body, his eyes were not silver, but a deep, peaceful gray. He looked so much like Driston that it hurt to look at him. "What do you mean?" Gwen stammered. "I mean he looks like Driston," Maggie replied. Gwen opened her mouth, but nothing came out. "Like Driston? They know about her and Driston?" "Ugh, Gwen Cassidy," Christopher said with a thick Scots burr. We've been waiting for you for some time now. Smiling, he slid his arm around Maggie's waist. They both stood there, beaming at her. Gwen blinked. How did you know my name? And what do you know about Justin? What's going on here? Her voice rising. Maggie kissed her husband's cheek, slipped from his embrace, and tucked her arm through Gwen's. Come in, Gwen. We have much to tell you, but I think you might be needing to sit while you're hearing it. Sit, Gwen repeated dumbly, her knees feeling weak. Good. Sitting good should be good. But sitting didn't happen, because the moment Gwen entered the great hall, she froze, gaping at the portrait that hung above the double staircase facing the entrance. It was her. 6 feet of Gwen Cassidy, clad in a pale lavender gown, blonde hair tumbling about her face, graced the wall at the landing between the 2 staircases. Me, she prompted to say, pointing. That's me. Maggie laughed. Aye, it was a painting in the 16th century. But Gwen didn't hear the rest. Her attention was caught and held by the family portraits covering nearly every inch of the walls of the great hall. From ancient times to modern day, they stretched from chair rail to ceiling, eager to see who Diogenes had married and what kind of children he'd fathered. She hurried past the modern paintings. Dimly, her mind registered that Maggie and Christopher were trailing behind her, now watching in silence. At the section displaying the 16th century, Gwen drew to a stunned halt. She stared for a moment, unable to believe what she saw, then smiled. Tears misted her eyes. She fancied she could hear faint strains of Sylvan's laughter in the air, and Nell making some saucy response. The patter of children's feet on the stone. The painting that held her captivated was 8 feet tall, a full-length portrait. Nell was seated on the terrace. Sylvan was standing behind her, his hands on her shoulders. Nell had twins in her arms. Nell? She finally said, turning to look at Maggie. Aye, the lot of us descended directly from Sylvan and Nell McKelter. He wed his housekeeper, so the records say. They had 4 children. We have twins in common a lot of this family. He looks pretty old to be having kids to me, Colleen said, wrinkling her nose as she bounced back into the great hall, following by her siblings. The tea's ready, she announced. Gwen's heart swelled. He was 62, she said softly, and Nell hadn't been a spring chicken either. Dear Nell had gotten her babies back after all, and it had been Sylvan who'd given them to her. She moved to the next portrait, but 2 empty spaces followed. The wall was darker where the portraits had once hung. What was here? She asked curiously. Had they taken down portraits of Justin to give her? Christopher and Maggie exchanged an odd glance. Just 2 portraits being touched up, Christopher said. There's Nell and Sylvan again, he said, pointing further down the wall. Gwen eyed them a moment. And Diogenes? Where's Diogenes? She asked. Again, the couple exchanged glances. He's a mystery, Maggie finally said. He wandered off somewhere in 1521. Is there no record of his death? No, Maggie replied tensely. How very odd, Gwen mused. But she would come back to that later. For now, thoughts of Tristan consumed her. Do you have any portraits of Tristan? Mom, Colleen cried. Come on, you're killing me. Let's get on with it. Christopher and Maggie grinned. Come, we have something more for you. But I have so many questions, Gwen asked. How do you... Later. Maggie said gently. I think we need to show you this first. Then you can ask whatever questions remain. Gwen opened her mouth, shut it again, and followed. When Maggie stopped at the door to the tower, Gwen took a slow, deep breath to calm the racing of her heart. Had Justin left something for her? Something he could give her children? From the father they could never know? When Maggie and Christopher engaged a loving glance, she nearly wept with envy. Maggie had her McKeltar. Gwen longed for some small token to remember hers by, a plaid with his scent, a portrait to show her babies, anything. She shivered, waiting. Maggie withdrew a key from her pocket, dangling on a fray and threadbare ribbon. There is a legacy handed down over the centuries at Castle Kelter. It has been the source of many young lasses' romantic dreams. She arched a brow at her eldest daughter. And Colleen here has been the worst. Not true. I've heard you and Dad mooing over this tons of times, and then you both get that disgusting look on your eyes. Might I remind you that the disgusting look you hold at the advent of your wee life, Christopher said dryly. Ew! Colleen wrinkled her nose again. Maggie laughed and continued. Sometimes I think the sheer love of it has blessed all who've ever lived within these walls. The tale was carefully told from generation to generation as they waited for the day to come. Well, the day has arrived, and now the rest is up to you. Smiling, she handed Gwen the key. It said, you'll know what to do. It said, you've done it before, Gwen added breathlessly. Perplexed, Gwen inserted the key with trembling hands. The lock was old and gritty with time, and it took her a few minutes to work the lock. As she opened the door, Christopher handed her a candle. There's no electricity in there. The tower hasn't been opened in 5 centuries. Suspense growing, Gwen accepted the candle and gingerly stepped into the room, dimly aware that her entire McKeltar clan was hot on her heels. It was too dark to see much, but the glow of the candle fell upon a pile of old fabric and the silvery flash of weapons. Justin's daggers. Her heart lurched painfully. She bent over and fingered the fabric upon which they lay. Tears strung her eyes when she realized it was his plaid, and atop it lay a small pair of black leather trousers that would probably be a perfect fit. He'd never forgotten that she wanted a pair. That's not all, Colleen said impatiently. That's the least of it. Look up. Colleen, Christopher said sternly. In her own time, lass. Blinking back tears, Gwen glanced up as her eyes adjusted completely. She noticed a slab in the center of the circular room. Her heart slammed against her ribs, and she urged to her feet. Oh my God, she choked, stumbling towards the slab. It couldn't be. How could it be? She glanced frantically at Maggie, who smiled and nodded encouragingly. He waits for you. He waited 500 years. It said you knew how to wake him. Gwen began to hyperventilate. Spots swarmed her eyes, and she nearly collapsed where she stood. For several moments, she could do nothing more than to stand there and stare in shock. When she thrust the black trousers, she hadn't realized she was clutching at Maggie and scrambling up on the slab. Justin, she cried. raining kisses on his slumbering face. Oh, Tristan, my love. Tears slipped down her cheeks. How had she awakened him? She wondered frantically, unable to believe that he was really there. She touched him with shaking hands, afraid he might just melt away, afraid that she was dreaming. I'm not dreaming, am I? She whispered weakly. No, alas, you're not dreaming, Christopher said, smiling. Gwen stared at Tristan, trying to recall exactly what happened in the cave. She had fallen down the ravine and landed squarely on top of him. She had been fascinated, had touched him, shamelessly running her hands over his chest. Then she leaned back so the sun could fall on him, so she might get a better look at the devastating man. The sun. You must help me get him outside. I think the sunlight has something to do with it. It took her combined strength to carry the enchanted Highlander down the winding stairs, through the library, and out into the cobbled terrace. They were huffing by the time they deposited her mighty warrior on the stones. Gwen stood for a moment, just gaping down at him. Tristan was here. All she had to do was figure out how to wake him. Dazed, she slipped astride him and placed her palms flush to his chest, exactly as she had done in the cave. The sunshine was falling directly on his face and chest. But nothing happened. The symbols remained, etched clearly upon his chest. Back in the cave, they'd begun to disappear. Why? She narrowed her eyes and peered up at the sun. It was brilliant and clear, a cloudless sky. She glanced at Maggie. He didn't leave any instructions? She needed him awake now. The McKelters shook their heads. It was thought he feared someone might wake him before it was time. She cast Colleen a wry look. Like my daughter has been infatuated with him ever since she first peeked through the slit in the tower and saw him slumbering. Closing her eyes, Gwen thought hard. What was different? She opened them again slowly and gazed down at his chest. Everything was the same. The sun, the symbols, her hands. Blood. There had been blood smeared on the symbols from her cutting her hands up when she had fallen through the rocks. Could it be that elemental? Human blood and sunshine? She knew nothing about spells, but blood figured prominently in myths and legend. I need a knife, she cried. Colleen dashed to the castle and returned swiftly, clutching a small steak knife. Mumbling a prayer beneath her breath, Gwen lightly ran the edge over her palm so drops of blood welled up. With trembling hands, she smeared it across the symbols on her chest, and then sat back, anxiously waiting. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, the symbols began to fade. She sucked in her breath and glanced up at his face. Good morrow, English. Justin had lazily opened his eyes, his silvery gaze tender. I knew you could do it, love. Gwen's eyelids fluttered, and she fainted. Oh, God. Chapter 28. And I'm at 2 hours and 35 minutes. When Gwen regained consciousness, she was lying on the bed in the silver chamber. Justin was bending over her, gazing down with so much love in his eyes. Then she gasped and began crying. Justin, she whispered, clutching at him. She's awakened, Maggie, Justin said over his shoulder. She's all right. Gwen heard the door shut as Maggie left, giving them privacy. She stared up into his silvery eyes wonderingly. He was looking at her as if he were the most precious thing in the world. How she managed to ask, cupping his face in her hands. She traced her fingers over every plane and angle, and he kissed them repeatedly as they passed his lips. How? I love you, Gwyncast McKelter, he whispered, catching her hand and planting a kiss in the palm. Gwen laughed through the tears. I love you too, she whispered back, flinging her arms around him and holding him tightly. But I don't understand. In between dozens of kisses, quick sips, long, leisurely ones, he told her. Told her how he watched her disappear as he lay on the ground, the battle raging all around. Told her how the arrow had been deflected by the metal discs on his leather band and had been but a flesh wound. Told her how they'd discover who the enemy was. That old woman, Gwen murmured. She said she'd hired the gypsies. Oi, Bisetta, she made a full concession. He kissed her again before continuing, sucking gently on her lower lip. Bisetta claimed she scried on her yew sticks that the woman would bring about a death to her son. Since I was so soon to wed, Bisetta decided my betrothed must be the woman in her vision. She warned Nevin, but he laughed it off and made a promise not to harm me. To her ailing mind, bespelling me wasn't harming me, so she purchased the gypsy service to enchant me, so she might prevent the wedding. In the first reality, when Anaya was killed by the Campbell, Bisetta must have thought the threat had passed. I suspect, however, that sometime shortly after Anaya's death, Bisetta must have had her vision again, and realized that as long as I was alive and might yet wed, the danger would never pass. So she decided with her original plan to have me enchanted. So she drugged you and sent the message bidding you come to discover the name of the man who killed Daigus. I was enchanted. You found me, and I sent you back. But in the second reality, Gwen exclaimed, since Daigus and Anaya weren't killed, she must have heard you were coming home with your betrothed. And stepped up to plans to have me abducted. Unwillingly to take any chances, she wanted my betrothed gone too. And you were in my bedchambers. They assumed that you were Naya. Gwen shook her head, amazed. It was her belief in her vision that made everything happen, Justin. If she hadn't believed in it, she would have never enchanted you. I would never have been sent back, and Nevin never would have given his life to save me. Aye, 'tis why the gypsies are cautious of fortune-telling. They make it clear that any fortune they scry is but one possible future. The most likely one. Yet not written in stone. For Bisetta, driven by lifelong fear, it was indeed her most probable future. Fear drove her to have me enchanted. Having me enchanted resulted in me sending you back. Once you were there, Nevin gave his life to protect you. Her fear drove her to fulfill the possibility. Gwen rubbed her forehead. Ugh, that hurts my head. Justin laughed. Huh, it hurts mine too. I'll be most happy to never muck mine time again. Gwen had silent a moment, thinking, what happened to Bisetta? Justin's eyes darkened. After you disappeared, she plunged into the battle, and though the men strove not to harm her, she was determined to die. She impaled herself on Robert's claymore. He frowned. She confessed before she died, and we were able to piece the story together. Fresh tears gathered in Gwen's eyes. You would wait for her, Justin exclaimed. If not for her, I should have never found you, Gwen said softly. It's sad. It's sad that she was so afraid, but at the same time, I am so glad I found you. He kissed her again, then told her the rest of it. How he grieved, how he raged, how he'd stormed to the stones and stood arguing with himself for hours. Then his mind had struck upon an idea, so temptingly possible that it had taken his breath away. The gypsies. They'd make him sleep once for 5 centuries, why not again? And so he tracked down the wandering tribe and commissioned their service. The gypsy queen herself had performed the spell for a pouch of coin. For a pouch of coin! Gwen exclaimed. How dare they charge you? They're the ones who sold the service, nothing more. The Rom hold themselves to a strange code. They maintain that blaming them for Besetta's commissioning them to enchant me would be akin to blaming the blade for drawing the blood. 'Tis the hand that wields the dagger, not the dagger itself. Fine way to evade personal responsibility, Gwen grumbled. Then she sucked in a hollow breath. Your family, Sylvan and Nell, and he cut her off by kissing her. My choice was painful to them, but they understood. He'd not once wavered. He'd spent several months saying his goodbyes before being enchanted, and implementing plans that would bear fruit 5 centuries later. Plans to ensure a fine life for him and his wife. But there would be time to tell her of that tomorrow, or the next day, or the next. They bid me give their love when we were reunited. Gwen got misty-eyed again, then thumped his chest with her fist. Why didn't you leave instructions for Maggie to find me weeks ago? My heart broke. I'd been back for over a month. I wasn't certain that when you'd return to your time, I couldn't decide if the month would pass for you in both centuries. Oh, she said in a small voice. And I wasn't willing to take any chances of summoning you before we met. Ugh, that would have been a fankle, wouldn't have been. You wouldn't have known how to make me. You wouldn't have even known me if we'd sent you too early. Seems safer to let you come. But what if I hadn't come? What if I never came back to Scotland? I had left instructions that you haven't arrived by Samhain or Samhain. My descendants would find you and bid you come. They were to look for you in America and bring you here. But are you going to talk me to death or kiss me, wife? He asked huskily. She opted for the kiss. When lips claimed hers, her body quickened with desire. He paused only to strip off his linen shirt, while Gwen made short work of his plaid. Lay back, she commanded, when she had him completely naked. I think I should like to be on top. He compiled, flashing her a sexy grin, and dripped promises of fantasies about to be fulfilled. She sat back on her heels, gazing at him, sprawled across the bed, his bronze skin and silky dark hair gleaming against the white linens. 6.5 feet of Highland warrior lay before her, awaiting her pleasure. Yum. Years of not understanding the equation of life culminated in one perfect moment of clarity. Life equaled love plus passion squared. Loving and being passionate about what one did was what made life so precious. And I'm going to circle that. Yes, I'm writing in the book. You can cuss me out later. She would be perfectly content to devote the rest of her life in the proof of that equation. Touch me, he purred. She touched, lightly, gliding her hands up his muscular thighs, tracing each muscle, each ridge, then lowering her head to taste in her hand's wake. She cupped him and swept her tongue up the underside of his hard shaft, delighting when he bucked underneath her. Gwendolyn, he thundered, cradling her head with his hands. I will not last a minute if you do that. Och, nay, my poor lord, she said in a lilting accent. Be still. 'Tis my pleasure you serve, ah. She burst into laughter. In one swift motion, he rolled her onto her back. I bid you recall I've been needing you for 500 years, whereas you've been waiting only a month. Yes, but you didn't know time was past, she began, as he kissed her words away. He covered her body with his own, sliding her shirt up, kissing each breast as he bared them, alternately returning for a searing kiss to her lips, then moving lower. When he last buried himself inside her, she groaned with ecstasy. He'd have waited 1,000 years, nay, an eternity, to have his woman as his own. Much later, Justin held her in his arms, marveling at how she completed him. She'd had her way, and he had his time, a third time, informing him that he was her own private playground, then explaining what a playground was. He had much to learn from fully integrating himself into her century. He suffered no fear on that score, rather, he was exhilarated by the challenge. Emotion flooded him, a sense of righteousness and completion, and he kissed her again, putting all his joy into it. He was surprised when she pulled away, but then she took his hand and gently placed his palm over her belly. He shot straight up in bed, searching her eyes. Are you telling me something? Twins. We're having twins. Hey, Frank! She said, bubbling over in joy. And you waited till now to tell me, he roared, then threw his head back and whooped. He swept her into his arms and danced her about the room. He twirled her, kissing her, dancing her more, and then stopped and gently placed her back on the bed. I shouldn't be tossing you around like that, he explained. Oh, please. If our loving didn't jostle them, the little dance certainly won't hurt. I'm a little over 2 months along. 2 months, he shouted, leaping to his feet again. Gwen beamed. He was so elated. It was that every woman should get to experience when she told her man that she was pregnant. A man utterly ecstatic to be a father. He stood grinning like a fool for a moment, then sobered and dropped to his knees before her. Will you be wedding me in a church, Gwendolyn? Aye. Oh, aye, she sighed dreamily. And this time, when they made love, it was tender and slow and sweeter than ever before. Where will we live? She asked finally, combing her fingers through his silky hair. She simply couldn't stop touching him. Couldn't believe that he was here. Couldn't believe the sacrifice he had made to be with her. He grinned. I took care of that. The estate was divided into thirds in 1518. My third is to the south. Daigus oversaw the construction of our home. It awaits us even now. Maggie and Christopher assured me they opened it in all is readiness. Daigus, Gwen thought. She needed to tell him about Daigus vanishing. There would be some time for that later. She didn't want anything to spoil the moment. You do not mind living in Scotland, do you, lass? He teased lightly, but she sensed a hint of vulnerability in his question. It'd be hard for him to adjust to a new century. It would be even more difficult if she dragged him off to America. In time, she suspected, he would like to travel. And he was a curious man, but Scotland would always be his home. Which was fine. She had no desire to go back to the States. The enormity of what he'd done, how much he had given up for her, overwhelmed her. Tristan, she breathed, you gave it all up. He pulled her into his chest and brushed his lips against hers. And I'd do it all over again, sweet Gwen. But your family, your century, your home? Oh, lass, do you not know? Your heart is for home. Dear reader, I'd like to share with you a letter that neither Gwen nor Justin have yet seen. I'm sure you've noticed the connection between the two portraits missing in the McKeltar Hall and Daigus vanishing in 1521. There are actually two legacies handed down over the centuries, but rather than spoil Gwen and Justin's reunion, Maggie and Christopher agreed to hold off on revealing the second one. You see, they have a letter addressed to Tristan and Gwen from Sylvan, as well as 2 shocking portraits of Diogus to show them. Yet they wished for Gwen and Tristan to have a few more stolen moments for loving before their new journey begins. Turn the page for a peek at Sylvan's letter from the Dark Highlander, coming next. Tristan, my son, I have missed you. I wished I could have met your brothers and sisters, but your heart was with Gwen, and 'twas where it wisely belonged. I wish the 2 of you every happiness, but rude to tell your trials are not yet o'er. First, the gentler news. Beloved Nell consented to be my wife. She has made every moment a joy. We left few things for the 2 of you in the tower. Count over 3 stones on the base of the slab. 2nd stone from the bottom. Life has been rich and full, more than ever dreamed. I have no regrets but one. I should have watched Diogus more closely after you went into the tower. I should have seen what happened. Share you slumbered, enchanted, waiting for your mate. Here I sat with mine. Yet Diogus grew ever more solitary. Blinded by my own happiness, I didn't see what was happening until it was too late. I shall scant be with details, but suffice to say, time passed. He became obsessed with you. Excuse me. He worried that something would happen to prevent you from surviving until you found Gwen again. And it did. I have no memory of it. Mayhap an odd wrinkle in my mind. But he confessed to me that the 3 years after we placed your enchanted body in the northeast tower, that wing of the castle caught fire, and you were burned and died. Diogus broke his oath, went back in time, threw the stones the day of the fire, and prevented the fire from occurring. He saved you, but in doing so turned dark. The old legends were true. If you're reading this, he succeeded in course, for he appointed himself your dark guardian. His sole purpose was to see you safely to Gwen. He vowed to watch over you, then disappeared. Diogus is a strong man, and I believe such a vow has kept him sane. I hoped it has, for I tasted the evil within him. I believe, however, the moment you awaken and are reunited, there will be nothing to hold his darkness at bay. His purpose accomplished, the thin thread that binds him to the light will snap. Oh, my son, 'tis sorry I am to be saying this, but you need to find him. You must save him. If you cannot save him, you must kill him. The first book that I have read in completion since 6th grade. Thank you for joining me for this. It means more to me than you could possibly understand. And next on the agenda, I have the next book. I didn't even know it. I just thought it was like a coincidence at the same thing. And it continues. So yeah. The Dark Highlander. Yep. Wow. That's awesome. I love this book. I absolutely loved this book. And not because of Tristan. Not because of Diogus. Because of the woman, Gwen Cassidy, in definitive detail, is like just one portion of like everything that I am. Like the descriptiveness in this, like I'm going to keep this book for the rest of my life. Like I don't know. There's like, and I thought this was an octopus leg. It's not, it's his kilt. Like, when I first looked at it, I was like, why is there an octopus holding like a little like watch? Shows you how much I need glasses. But this is his kilt. This is a huge accomplishment for me. I know it means nothing to y'all, but this was a really big accomplishment for me. Sign it. Finished on 11/23/21. I don't know if you can see that. Wow. You know, and I'm going to tell you the backstory again. I know some of you have already heard it. When I was a kid, I couldn't read. I couldn't understand the words. I couldn't enunciate the words. I was doing hooked on phonics. I was doing special programming. I was doing all kinds of stuff. I couldn't read. So in school, I found a way to lie about reading and saying that by looking at the pictures, I understood the story and I would tell the story based off of the pictures. And it got me passed through a good bit of my schooling. My mom caught on and she found books that didn't have pictures in them. And it was the only ones that she could find. I started reading them and enunciating the words and learning, the meanings of the bigger words and stuff like that. And I started reading romance novels in 5th grade. In 6th grade, I brought a romance novel to school. And a teacher found it. And she took it from me and she belittled me and made me feel like I was the scum of the earth because I was reading this. It actually became a teacher-parent conference with the principal and stuff. I almost got suspended. And my mom explained to them the reason why she gave it to me. They felt it inappropriate, took it from me, and I never read again. I never read a full book since then. And that was 6th grade. I'm now almost 40 years old. I mean, I've read snippets here and there, read through things periodically, not in full detail. I've never read a full book since then. The fact that my mom gave me this book and the character that's in it describes me. And the fact that I read this in public to y'all and that you enjoyed hearing me read it means, like, I'm about to cry. Like, it means so much to me right now. I was asked to read a book because they liked my voice. And even though I kept messing up and didn't know some of the words, y'all still stuck with me through it. Thank you. There is nothing that you cannot do. I promise you that. And don't you dare let somebody tell you that you can't do something. Because you can't. I'm so happy right now. I'm crying happy tears. I'm not upset. I'm really happy. I know this is like so stupid to y'all. You know what? And I'm probably going to get banned for this, but I don't care. I want to celebrate. Hold on a second. I'll be right back. Oh, I'm about to take everything with me. Hold on. God damn it. Where's my glass? Hold on. I want to celebrate with you guys. This is the first drink I've had in so long. Thank you, Frank. Kiss me hard. Thank you, Daniel. And anybody else who's watching. Because this is such a good love story, I've had this for over a year. And I put it in the fridge. I found it today. It was packed up, and I've had it for over a year. And it's called D'Amore Amaretto. And it's a liqueur. I can't read it. Hold on. Bitter almonds and blended with a delicate essence of apricots for an earthly, rich finish. I'll be honest with you, it tastes like cherry and almonds. It's really good. You can get it open. It's really thick too. So cheers to my reading of my first ever full book since 6th grade. Live. To people I've never met in my entire life. And I hope one day to meet. To many more books ahead of us. So, what'd you think of the book? Oh, it's such a mush. I cry at commercials. That's why I don't watch them. How many of you guys fantasized about being Drustin? I know I fantasized about being Gwen Cassidy. I don't even know how many times. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. I missed a lot, but I like you reading the sexy bits. Thank you. It hit me hard in my romantic heart. Aww. I don't know. Some of those sexy bits were kind of a little embarrassing to read, especially when my dad was standing right outside moving the trash cans and he heard everything I was saying, and it was like right at the honey spot. Like Red is like, oh well, he's pouring honey all over her sensitive bits and licking it off. And I'm just like, my dad's standing right outside. Whatever. It's not like he's never heard a romance story before in his life. My mom used to read it to him as, like, before they'd go to bed. She'd read romance stories to him. It's complicated, but like needing to be distracted. This was distracting for me, and I thank you. Aww. I'm glad. See, I wanted to give y'all something completely different. Completely different. Because I know for a fact that there was nobody out there that was reading freaking romance novels. In multitudes. Not even just one night. Like 2 weeks straight, just about. Well, I hope that whoever did hear this or see this enjoyed the bit of it that they did get. So maybe it'll get somebody interested in reading romance novels now. It's a good niche. She got 30-some since I joined. Well, I mean, I'm more than happy to continue. I mean, this was just the beginning. We got the next chapter of Daigus. And my fucking horrible ass Scottish accent that's like mixed with English. But yeah, Daigus. Daigus is next. The Dark Highlander. Yeah. And if you have any books that you would like for me to read, let me know. I'll be more than happy to add them to my book list. As soon as I get done with this next one. Okay, so we've learned. Okay, how long have I been doing the romance novel book? I've only been streaming this for like, what, 2 weeks now? I want to say 2 weeks. And chapter 6 was a waste. We just basically talked. And I ended up having to delete, or not deleting, but YouTube deleted my stuff yesterday. So everything that happened yesterday it's gone. So that entire section of the book, you're never going to know because unless you read it. So, oh, I've got 90 followers now. I got 50 followers in the past 2 weeks. I was like, holy crap. I've been streaming off and on for about 7 months now, and I got the most in the past 2 weeks. I was so happy. It's a lot of people. Let's see. I've been live for 3 hours. It didn't even feel like 3 hours. All right, so this started. I'm trying to see how long it took me to read this book. It was before November 15th. I know that. This damn phone keeps popping up a little box. How long do I start reading these romance novels? I want to say it took us like 2 weeks to get through this one book. I don't know. Oh, I finally did the link tree, by the way. If you guys are interested, it's in the chat box, I think. The top. And my Twitch account's not going to tell me either, I bet. Gosh, it's so cold. My feet are freezing. Gosh, it's so cold. My feet are freezing. That's loud. Reverb. I was trying to go back and see if my Twitch account would show how long I've been doing it. I bet you my YouTube would, though. Hold on. Your videos. I don't know why the dog is barking. My hair gets everywhere. It drives me crazy. Oh my god, there's 54. Hold on. These are all daytime. Where's the first 18 plus? Okay, so the first 18 plus was on November 11th. So yeah. What the fuck day is it? It's almost Thanksgiving, isn't it? Is there a romance tag or iBook tag you could add to stream? I mean, I can add anything. You can go back in and, no, I mean in general for like the whole book. How long did it take me to read the whole book? Is what I was talking about, Frank. I got people commenting on my story on my social media that I'm thinking it's me. It's not. That's somebody else from Pinup Heaven. If you're on my Facebook, that's not me. What day is today? So yeah, 2 weeks almost to the day. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. It took me 13 days to read this book. We'll say 12 because chapter 6 didn't do much of nothing. I mean, I could. I don't know how to do that, though. 26 hours of content, not bad. Of just reading. That's not including my day streams. I do 2 hours at 10 a.m., 2 hours at 5 p.m., then 2 hours at 10 p.m. every day. Oh, and I missed one night at 10 p.m., so really in 11 days. I feel like I got a hair in my mouth. I hate that. I need to try to keep the titling consistent too. I noticed that the other day that like the titling on my YouTube and stuff is different for each stream, and I need to try to keep the titling as similar as possible so people can search it. If you can't find one of my streams, just search my name. You can find it anywhere. Crazy Fox, we just finished it. We just finished Kiss of a Highlander, and we're going to do the following book, which is the next book, I guess starting tomorrow, of Dark Highlander, which is about the brother. So if you want to join us for that, Crazy Fox, I'd be more than happy to have you. Yep. We just finished it. The past 11 days we've been working on it. The brother, what? You'll have to join me. You'll have to join me tomorrow night, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we'll start the new book. Or you can go back and check my previous 10 p.m. streams. Yes, they will be there. They will always be here. And if I don't have them, I'll have a statue of them. How about that? Can't read without them. I can't do a whole lot of things with them, so a hard rock statue? I don't know. If I ever don't have them anymore, I'll have a statue for you guys. of some sort. I might just be surrounded with boobs. Like just boob statues. Fertility statues or whatever they're called. Really thick girl. Big boobs. Big butt. Big belly. Just like me. Thick thighs. Pretty eyes. Just for you guys. Thank you. And if that dog don't stop barking, I swear. That's Abby. Can you hear her? She done heard a possum in the field or deer in the field or something. She won't stop barking. No, boob, I was thinking something else when I said hard rock statues. I mean, whatever you can think of. You're only limited to your imagination, so. Oh my God, it's 1:30 in the morning. It's what temperature is it now? It was 53 when I started the stream. I know it's got to be colder than that now. It's 46 degrees outside right now in North Carolina. Another 5-hour stream. No, I'm going to cut it short. I am going to cut it short tonight. I am glad that you guys joined me for the finishing of the book. I did go longer so we could finish tonight. I had that stamina going. I just kept going until you finished. So you're welcome. I don't know if I could do another 5-hour one, though. I am kind of old and tired. I got up at 8:30 this morning after go to bed at 4:30 this morning. Oh, I ended up missing getting the kids up for school this morning. That was not good. Luckily, my daughter got them up and got them on the bus. I didn't even hear the bus. And the bus stops literally right outside the camper. So I didn't even hear the bus. I was so dead to the world. You are courteous. Wait, hold on. This stupid phone keeps blocking my view. You are courteous to go longer so we can finish. You are very welcome. I intend to please my audience. So, starting tomorrow night will be The Dark Highlander, which is the succession of the series, evidently. I need to find out if there's a third book, before I go any further. I liked it because of the fact that it was, exciting to learn this. I learned it along with y'all. I'd never read the book before, never even heard of it before my mom handed it to me. And then she handed me the other book with it, too. And she's like, oh, yeah, this one's about time travel and this one's about ghosts. And she just handed them both to me. She didn't say that they were, 1 and 2. She didn't tell me anything else. She was just like, oh, here's 2 romance novels. Here's one's about time travel, another one about ghosts. I guess I lucked out. So I learned the book along with y'all, which made it so much more fun. And I'm not gonna read ahead for the second one either. I'm gonna read it with y'all, just the same way. I think it makes it more interesting that way. I don't know if I'll be able to continue. I'm going to have to work on my Scottish brogue. My feet are freezing. Mary, you heater. Oh. Yeah. Like The Simpsons. Damn it. Is it charged yet? There. Cut the cord. Be done with it already. The Immortal Highlander. I know, right? How many times are you going to bring a motherfucker back? Shit. Magic only works so much, and if you like by returning to like whatever's, then like it would change like everything. So I don't know, but yeah, that's the third book. I don't know. This next one seems like it's. I mean, the title even says The Dark Highlander. I wonder if he's like the marauding, like plundering, like evil druid witchcraft slash. And not witchcraft is not all bad. There's a lot of really good in witchcraft, anyways. So keep that in mind. Like white magic and stuff. It's when you wish well on others. You don't wish anything negative. Kiss Dark Immortal. Ooh. I might need to get the immortal one. Let's see how this second book goes. Oh, y'all are just making this old lady feel older than she already is. Where are we at here? All right, so story time. New book for Tuesday. That's good to know. I bet the dark dude has some kinks. Hell yes. I hope it's like fucking better than 50 Shades. I hope it's like some serious like BDSM fucking like hardcore shit. Like, yes. Because you gotta remember how lonely he was. He watched everybody else be in relationships around him and they were all happy and he was just like alone and got comfortable in that aloneness. So I thought you were 27. Shit. I don't even remember what I was doing when I was 27. But thank you. You made me my favorite. Yep, I'll be 40 in March. I have a 20. I want to say he's 25 now. I always get his birthday mixed. I know it's in April. This is horrible. My oldest son, he was adopted. And I think he's 25 now. I want to say he's 25, like pretty confidently. You have a birthday coming up in December? Happy early birthday, Frank. Oh, I was doing math. 14. Yeah. No, 15. 15. So he's 24. Yeah. Because when I turned 30, he was 15. And everyone was like, how did you have a son like that young? I was like, yeah, I started early. He's half your age. Mm-hmm. Magic. He looks so much like you. I bet. All my kids look exactly like me. Like they all have my features. Even my adopted ones. And that's really weird. Like, how? They even have my facial feature. Like you said earlier about Sissy, how she has my facial expressions. Yeah. They all have the same thing. It was adorable. Thank you. She's all right. I think I'll keep her around a little bit longer. She's very hyper. She has like a high energy drive. Like really high. That's how she is all the time. There's no calming down. Like the only time she ever calms down is when she's doing crafts. That's it. thought she was nuts on sugar. I mean, that's a possibility that added to it. But for the most part, that's legitimately how she is like all the time. If you go back and look through the other streams, especially like my first stream when I did the gummy bear, she's like this all the time. All my cooking shows that she's been on, the game shows that we've been on, all the time. She's my shadow. Literally, that's what everybody calls her, is my shadow. She's my 6-foot shadow. She's the only kid in the whole family that's that close to me. Like, she's really cuddly. She's really, like, lean on you. Like, you know what I mean? My other kids don't even give them a hug. Like, I have to ask for a hug. That's not cool, Mom. Like, I have to ask my youngest son for a hug every once in a while. Like, he'll be watching his phone and he'll be like, I'll just go up to him and I'll be like, where's my hug, bro? Everybody in the family is bro. Whether you're male or female, you're bro. I'm bro. Or bitch, depending. But yeah. So I'm going to kick off of here in about 4 minutes. So I hope y'all enjoyed that book. Again, thank you. Can't thank you enough for joining me for that. And if you'd like to check out my other social media, now I don't have to explain it in detail for like 5 minutes. I have a link tree now. If you'd like to check that out, there's like, I finally figured out how to get all these links on here. It took me all day to get this. So, wait, let me go back. Let me figure out how to share it. Hold on. Add link tree to socials. Copy. I'm going to put it in the stream chat. How did I end up back here? I thought you were, honey. Kids are like that, but it is wonderful. Y'all can have fun together like that. Yeah. That is my link tree. If you'd like to check out my other social media, I kind of gathered it all together. Thanks to, I can't remember who told me about it, but thank you for telling me about it because now I have it all together. I don't have to go through a long list of nonsense. How did you end up back here? I have that natural attraction. Y'all don't know you don't understand why. But you do have this small curiosity that you like to check out every once in a while. Even if it's momentary. And welcome back. No, I'm not honey tonight. I'm more darling tonight. I do like honey, though. Preferably sourwood. Sourwood honey is my favorite. And yes, there's different kinds of honey. Thank you. I am about to crash and burn in this bed because it's been roasting for like hours. I'm gonna be so comfy. I hope to God this thing doesn't cut out like it did last night. It is so cold. Oh my God. So yeah, feel free to join me tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for morning announcements, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow for Tasty Tuesday, which is viewer choice. Because my parents and I don't get along, and the boys have the living room and the girls have the main spare room in the back, and there's really no place for me to stay. And to be honest with you, I don't want to be in there. So I give my kids the space that they need and places that they need, and yeah. And plus, my parents and I don't get along. We stay in the same room for 5 minutes and we're already arguing about something from like 30 years ago. So yeah. Yeah. And I just want my kids to have more peace. Like that's all that I want them to have is peace and a home to live in and consistency. And I just wish we had our own place again. Like that's what I'm working for. Is for us to have a home again. And to have a career. Those are my two main goals. You never realize how much you miss the stupid little things until they're gone. Thank you, Daniel. But yeah, I'm going to kick off of here. And I hope y'all have a wonderful evening. Make sure you get plenty of rest. Be careful this week because there's people going to be losing their freaking minds because of the holidays. If you see anything really cool on sale, let me know about it. Yes, I know. I tend to get diarrhea of the mouth sometimes. Thank you. But yeah. So hopefully I'll be able to see you guys again tomorrow. And tomorrow, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, if you'd like to join us again. For the Dark Highlander, we'll do the second book in the series. And I do need, before I go, I need 2 numbers between 1 and 100 to do for Tasty Tuesday because I forgot to ask last week. So 2 numbers between 1 and 100. All right, 42. What's the other one? I'm going to write that down. Hold on. So the 42nd book and the 27th recipe. I'll have to look at it tomorrow and see what it is. But the 42nd book that's on the shelf and 27th recipe in that book. I used to say page, but there's a lot of cookbooks that have a lot of just pages of explaining the history behind the cooking. So sometimes there's no recipes on the 27th page. So I'm going to do 27th recipe in whatever book it is. And if there's not 27 recipes in that book, we'll just go to the next one. So whatever. Tomorrow is Tasty Tuesday for viewer choice at 5 p.m. And again, story time tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with the new book. So, until then, I hope you have a wonderful night. And don't forget to read a book and behave.